Or poor judgment.
Yeah,
what
I'm
a
afraid
muppet.
so.
We're doing planks later, you and I.
We are.
Talking
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. Well, Megan's made a late appearance. I mean, she wasn't on it yesterday. I don't think the beach is good enough, but this.
Have you already found the winner?
This.
Is there any need to do the show?
I mean, I think so. I think Keir Starmer's got to be on it again anyway. Russell Quirk's here for the next 3 hours for your delectation. I'll be back later on this weekend. I'm not sure if it's tonight. Plank of the Week will be out, though. And then back on Monday for more common sense. The world is moving, ladies and gentlemen. It's changing, and we're going to be right ahead of it. This is Talk.
You're fired up, aren't you?
I spoke to the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
Time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams who scores, and Spain lead. A shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, Oivamo slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Yes, good morning. It is Russell Quirk in for Alex Phillips. I'm here till 1 o'clock. It is Friday, by the way. Now, I know it might be a little bit confusing insofar as which day it is, but it is Friday, so we're going to the weekend, and then I guess for most of us, back to normal on Monday. Back to work, back with a bang. Although, of course, here on Talk over the Christmas and New Year period, it has been business as usual, bringing you, particularly over the last 2 or 3 days, lots and lots of news, information and opinion as usual. So yes, welcome. I'd like your company and your involvement, if possible, please, over the next 3 hours. Do get involved. You can call in on 0344 499 1000, or indeed, of course, you can text, as usual, the word talk and your message to 87222. Maybe a WhatsApp message if you're a little bit shy and don't want to talk to me specifically and directly. Same number, 0344 499 1000. So, coming up on the show, lots and lots. Labour has blocked an inquiry into Keir Starmer's conduct as the head of the Crown Prosecution Service while he was investigating the old and child grooming scandal. Interesting that, isn't it, that Labour should block an inquiry into the conduct of someone that is now the Labour Prime Minister and was at the time the Director of Public Prosecutions. I wonder why that would be. We will be getting into that over the next 3 hours. Also, this will irritate you, NHS managers' salaries have soared by more than £1.1 billion over the last 10 years, despite, of course, as we well know, repeated failures to hit targets on such things as cancer and waiting lists and so on. So more reward for failure. That seems to be an ongoing theme, doesn't it? Also, Labour has delayed until 2028. That's 3 years, a planned overhaul of social care, announcing another independent commission that it hopes will build a national consensus, whatever that means. If you know what that means, let me know, 0344 499 1000. But effectively, Labour, now they're in power, kicking the can down the road. And actually, when it comes to social care, it is a very, very serious issue that faces Britain in terms of the problems that lie within our social care system. Labour, of course, elected on a mandate to fix such things, but it looks like they are kicking social care into the long grass. 2028, by the way, there'll only be a year of their tenure left, because I think there is very, very little chance indeed of this Labour government being returned for a second time, don't you think? And also, as Mike has been extolling the virtues of Meghan Markle's new Netflix show, With Love, Meghan. It's lovely, isn't it? It's set to come out later this month, January the 15th to be exact. The 8-part cookery series will showcase her Hollywood housewife style, and there's no fakery. I mean, this is all real. This is how Meghan, I'm sure, conducts herself on a daily basis. Dogs in the corner, friends around sipping Prosecco while she demonstrates how to make cakes and arrange flowers. It's all lovely. It's all very, very real. She is, I guess, attempting to be the next Martha Stewart. How did that end? Not very well. She says, we're not in the pursuit of perfection, we're in the pursuit of joy. This is not perfection, this is playfulness, whatever that means. It is sickening, it is cringeworthy, it is nauseating. It will be brilliant because it is so awful. Lots of guests coming up with regard to the stories that we will be talking about, but no least in Dr. Alan Mendoza, who is Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. He will be with me till 1 o'clock. Alan, welcome.
Hello, Russell.
Happy New Year.
And to you.
Thank you. Lots to talk about. Let's talk about the Labour grooming gang inquiry blocking. We covered this extensively on this show yesterday, and I know Mike has been talking about it this morning. Surprise, surprise. So we have this situation with Oldham Council, which was when Labour controlled, they repeatedly refused to vote on a resolution to send a message to government that there should be a proper, full and formal government inquiry. Now that Oldham Council has reconstituted and got rid of some of its Labour councillors, and Labour therefore no longer have control, they have elected and resolved to send that message formally. It's now been approved by the council that they wish there to be a full government inquiry as a council. That message has gone to the government, and of course Jess Phillips has responded, albeit it took her about 3 months, I think, and they have now decided to block that attempt at a government inquiry, and particularly blocking any inquiry into Keir Starmer's conduct when he was the head of the Crown Prosecution Service. Alan, what is it do we think that Labour have to hide?
Well, I think it's, a problem that every government's contended with. I mean, it's interesting to note what's happened here, because the previous Conservative government also did not go for a national inquiry in the sense of when it was asked to do a full one. There have been various inquiries. There was a report, a national report on this. So all the governments don't want to tackle this, because all governments will discover that they've been complicit in some way in this. Some more than others, though. I think it's quite clear that given the Prime Minister's previous role, there is a very important set of questions that need to be asked about what he was doing in that period of 2008 to 13 when he was in that role, when many of these crimes were taking place. Now, he has addressed this in various parts in the past, but an inquiry would enable him to come to the table, be asked, a whole slew of questions, and for him to give the answers that people are looking for. So I think it's obvious that they don't want him to go there. I think it's interesting as well. Jess Phillips, back in 2018, Telford Council asked the Conservative government for a similar thing. They were told no. But Jess Jess Phillips at the time said, no, we must have a national inquiry.
Yes.
So it's extraordinary that now she has the opportunity to do the national inquiry and correct the wrong that the previous Conservative government did. She decided not to do it, and there has to be a party political reason
and
for
she's
it.
also on record multiple times when in opposition calling for more action.
Exactly.
And one would imagine that action, therefore, from her point of view, when in opposition, would include a proper formal inquiry. The problem with her statement now, of course, apart from doing a U-turn, is that she says it's a matter for Oldham Council. Now, the problem is with council-led investigations, they won't have the teeth, they won't have the legs that a proper government inquiry will have. And she knows that, doesn't she? She knows that, yes, decades and decades of cover-ups by council leaders, and of course a lot of the councils involved here, whether it be Telford, Rochdale, Oldham and so on, were under Labour control at the time. So there will be council leaders and council officers that are complicit in sitting on their hands or indeed covering this stuff up. Maybe it goes higher. Keir Starmer, of course, is said to, in 2012, has said that ethnicity must not be a blocker to justice, effectively. But, of course, he was the Director of Public Prosecutions from 2008, when much of this was going on. Why did it take him 4 years to make such a statement, I wonder?
Well, those are questions that, he needs to answer. That's the whole point. That's the point.
Because there won't be an inquiry.
Well, there ought to be questions in the House of Commons. There are ways, of course, to try and hold him to account on these subjects. But it's not just him. I mean, I think, we're focusing on him, and that's fair enough. I mean, he's the PM. He held an important position beforehand. It's his government who ultimately will decide on the scope of this.
But he was ultimately responsible as the Director of Public Prosecutions
absolutely.
at the time that this scandal broke.
Yes.
And, of course, we now also have Simon Danchuk, of course, who is a Labour Member of Parliament up in Rochdale, who has said over the last 24 hours on this station that he was put under immense pressure not to pursue his concerns over these rape gangs. And I will say rape gangs, as we said yesterday, these are not grooming gangs. That is way too soft a label, in my opinion. These were rape gangs, and by the way, still are. As we said yesterday, this stuff still goes on. So Simon Danchuk, in a position of authority and power as a Labour MP, says that politically there was huge pressure not to expose and pursue these gangs.
Well, is that not the reason that's one of the reasons Jess Phillips is not going into this right now? Look at Jess Phillips' own constituency. Look at this. At a time when the Labour Party were overturning Conservative majorities, of 20,000 for fun, her majority went down from around 14,000 to the 600s. Now, why was that? Let's look at the makeup of her constituency demographically. It is a large Muslim proportion within that constituency, and what's been quite clear for the last 15, 20 years has been that a reason politicians don't want to engage in this subject is because of the ethnicity stroke religion of some of the perpetrators, the large body of perpetrators in the towns you're talking about, by far in excess of their share of the national population. There's a heavy preponderance of Pakistani origin men who are responsible for these crimes. It's been shown numerous times.
Yep.
Okay?
And that, I'm afraid, I know that might be triggering, but it is a matter of fact.
That's a matter of fact. And the point is that people have tried to shy away from this because they have been told, don't go near this, it looks like it's racism, stroke Islamophobia, anything that's kind. It isn't. There is simply a criminal reality that needs to be resolved. And the problem is that politicians have refused to go there because they fear the electoral consequences. And this, Russell, is the problem, because it's only going to get worse. As if you start to think that there are sectarian voting blocs in this country that are getting larger year on year because of a combination of natural growth and immigration, are you more or less likely to tackle tough subjects like this? The answer is less, unless you are brave and unless you're willing to actually go and say, I'm standing up for the national interest rather than other points, and I'm going to make this point regardless of the electoral consequence. And if there really are people in this country who are going to vote against you because you're looking into crimes against, rape gang, or rather rape gangs committing crimes against young girls and boys in this country, well, God help you. Well, if that's the case, what are we doing here in this country today?
As we referenced yesterday, this is putting votes and politics before the needs and concerns of the victims and the victims' families. And, of course, it's even worse than that. Often there were whistleblowers here, whether it be the girls themselves or the parents, that were effectively told that, yes, despite the fact, and I'm paraphrasing here, but despite the fact that your daughter was 12 or 13 years old, she was provocative. She dressed in such a way as to be asking for it. I mean, that is an absolutely outrageous and abhorrent narrative for anybody in authority to use as an excuse not to pursue these rapists, these criminals. Let's just talk about, on the politics side of this, Chris Philp, of course, the Shadow Home Secretary, has now written to Miss Phillips urging her to rethink her decision. Well, he would, wouldn't he? Yes, as you've just referenced, the Conservatives had the opportunity in 2022 to investigate this by way of a formal inquiry. In fairness, that wasn't as the result of a formal resolution from Oldham Council, because Oldham Council, understandably, from their point of view, because of what they were seeking to hide, continually blocked that formal resolution. But the Conservatives, and indeed Reform, are potentially here just kind of playing the opportunist card, aren't they? I mean, they would say now in the last 24 hours that there should be a formal investigation because, of course, they can see that Labour, and particularly Jess Phillips, are on the back foot. Is it just opportunism?
Well, I would like to think that obviously the Conservatives have, under Kemi Badenoch, have fessed up a lot to the mistakes of the past. I think here's a reality. The Conservatives made many mistakes. It's one of the reasons they were turfed out.
Can I just add, though, in 2022, I think Kemi Badenoch was the Equalities Minister, who presumably was part of the decision to say no to an inquiry.
Well, then that's a question for her as to what on earth was going on there.
Isn't it hypocritical of her now?
Well, you can say it's hypocritical, but doing the right thing, for whatever reason, is still doing the right thing. The right thing in this case is going to be to hold a national inquiry onto a problem that is clearly national in scope and nature, and where, despite the fact that we've had individual local inquiries across the country, the dots are not being joined up. People are not looking at the commonalities here, the linkages perhaps, A, in terms of modus operandi, but B, in terms of potentially the actual links between the gangs.
Yes.
And were they working together on this?
Well, it would seem that despite the fact there were thousands, potentially tens of thousands of incidents, and certainly thousands of predominantly white underage girl victims, that this was treated across the country almost as an isolated matter rather than being what it was, which is effectively a huge conspiracy, a culture even, of rape by largely Pakistani men gangs towards underage white girls. That is exactly what it was, and that is what the inquiry, if there were to be one, should uncover. But it doesn't look like there's going to be one. The problem, of course, Alan, as well, with inquiries is that they effectively are a way of kicking the can down the road for 2 or 3 years, a bit like Labour have just done with the social care issue that we will be talking about later. Let's just talk about something else that's pretty triggering and irritating. Albanian burglars. This individual, Dorian Puka, I think is how we pronounce his surname. What an apt surname, can I just say? Dorian Puka. This is an individual, an Albanian, that came to this country and was then convicted of attempted burglary. Unbelievably, he was actually deported. I mean, we should give a small round of applause, I think, to the Home Office back whenever that was, 2015-16. But of course, then he re-entered the country, got convicted again, and got deported again, like some kind of migrant yo-yo. He's then re-entered the country. I mean, how does this man re-enter the country? Whether it be on a small boat or on a plane with a false passport, I mean, who knows? But it's outrageous that a convicted criminal, convicted twice, should be allowed to come back into the country. And now he's spent not only Christmas and New Year taunting the public, the police and politicians, photoshopping pictures of Nigel Farage into images of him in restaurants, him sitting in the driver's seat of a £300,000 Ferrari, effectively sticking his fingers up at the population of Britain. And frankly, if we've got a picture of him, I think that he should be jailed just for his taste in tracksuits alone, because, yes, sartorially adept he is not. So, he is taunting us, he is baiting us. The reason that he can't now apparently be deported is because, of course, he has applied for asylum. The Home Office in a statement say, well, we can't deport anybody until their asylum process, their asylum application has been processed and concluded. Well, that apparently is the law, so I would suggest that we change the law. If someone is a convicted criminal from overseas and they've been deported twice, regardless of whether they seek asylum or not, frankly, they shouldn't be allowed to apply for asylum. But that is the law. And also, I mean, surely, as a special case, this abhorrent individual that has caused misery for lots and lots of householders, this individual having been convicted of multiple burglaries, why don't we just process his asylum application in 24 hours and say no and get rid of him?
Brilliant, Russell. You were taking the words out. I was going to go there. If we're able to do that with justice, as for example we did in the Southport riots, you know, kind of haul people up in 24 hours, put them in jail, there is no reason in an obvious case like this, when the answer is going to be no and everyone knows it, why it will take 6 months to process. Just put him straight up to the top of the queue, take a look, judge, stamp it no, get him out of here.
It's easy.
It's so simple. It's so simple. Here's an example again of the bureaucracy just not working and not a political priority.
And why doesn't it get done? I mean, we also hear stories, of course, of people being deported. They end up on a plane.
Yes.
They're the holiday makers on their way to wherever, and the holiday makers, the passengers, and indeed the crew find out that there's someone on the plane that's being deported. And even though he might be a rapist, or in this case, just a burglar, and they object, and that person gets taken off the plane because the population, it seems, feels sorry for the individual being sent back to where he was born and brought up. The other thing, just to add, of course, there was something over the Christmas period, an article that shows that a number of asylum seekers, I mean something like 70% or so, have had asylum granted to be in the UK, but then have gone back to their place of birth, the country that they are fleeing from, on holiday.
Of course.
Unbelievable. Look, more of this irritating, triggering nonsense after the break. I'm Russell Quirk, this is Talk.
We launched our kind of research this morning, highlighting 3 key important figures about what happened with Channel migrants. You're right, there's 151,136 arrived since 2018. That has led to £1 billion worth of profit to the people smugglers in that same period, just since 2018. And just for each year in total, it's cost us £15 billion.
Saturday night, and you lucky people have got 4 of Talk's mightiest personalities in one room. I mean, what could go right? Me, Jeremy Kyle, Michael Graham, Julia, I'm Not Grumpy Tonight, Hartley Brewer and Kev O'Sullivan. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Jules is smiling.
I think they've made us all look a lot better than we actually look.
Well, I know what to ask for next time I go to the hairdresser.
I'd like to talk about Jez's nipples on his...
You got nipples? Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's got nipples.
I didn't think you had nipples.
Across the UK on DAB+. on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. I'm in until 1 o'clock. Let's talk about Sweden. Why? Well, because it's an example. I think it was certainly an example as to how to deal with the whole COVID epidemic. Famously, obviously, they dealt with it rather differently to everybody else and came out of it rather positively in terms of their economy and the results of COVID insofar as deaths and so on. But they can also, I think it's fair to say, be seen as an example of how not to deal with immigration, particularly when it comes to asylum. They famously decided to be rather liberal when it comes to allowing people into the country. They opened the doors significantly, allowed everybody in, and then over the last few years have reaped the consequences of that. They've now, in the last 12 months, apparently recorded their lowest number of asylum applications actually since 1997, following a huge crackdown as the immigration minister there blames migrants' failure to integrate. I guess the question is, how should Britain do the same? So Sweden have gone from one extreme to the other, allowing all and sundry in, seeing the consequences of that in terms of the lack of cultural integration, social problems, and indeed, I'm sure, economic issues. And they've now decided to close the door, to pull the drawbridge up. What do you think of their approach? And should we do the same? How do we do the same in Britain so that we don't end up the same as them in terms of the disaster that occurred on their streets and in terms of crime and socially, in terms of, as their minister says, the migrants in their country failing to integrate? 0344 499 1000. Let me know what you think. What should we do? How should we do it? Text 87222. Alan, what do you think of this? This is an experiment, really, isn't it, insofar as what happens when you open your doors to all and sundry, legal and illegal immigration, and then, lo and behold, a few years later, you realise what a mistake it was, do an about turn, and now it seems to have worked in that migrants are no longer targeting Sweden as their destination.
Well, that bit seems to have worked in the sense that it proves that you can introduce legislation and rules that will stop people coming to your country. If you say, look, we're just not going to give you these work permits, we're not allowing your family to come with you, surprise, surprise, it turns out people find more attractive venues, I don't know, like Britain, to come to instead. But the damage has been done. The reality is that the Swedes are doing this, and it's too little too late. They've allowed a lawless state in many of their cities now, this sort of gang warfare, the rise in hatred, the lack of integration. It's obvious to anyone who can see. And, you know, as a result of this, they are, you know, they've realised too late what's happened. Now, how they deal with this going forwards, I don't know. But the reality is that even if you slow the pace, there is still a pace of change, there is a demographic transition. And if you have failed to integrate the migrants who are already in your country, that then perpetuates down the line. And you end up with a serious social cohesion disaster, which they're now saying they're trying to close the door once a horse has bolted already. They're going to have to go a lot further. And that's the same with every other European country.
So what it doesn't seem they're going to do is deport those that are there already. I mean, one would imagine, though, that they will be deporting those from overseas that commit crime. And to your point about crime, I mean, Sweden has gone from being a largely, I wouldn't say crime-free, but crimeless country in relative terms, to over the last decade being absolutely awash with an epidemic of not just crime, but very, very serious crime indeed. So they're, as the newspapers are putting it, their open-hearted ideals led to an epidemic of gang-related gun violence, bombings, and so on, muggings, sexual offences, and so on, as a consequence of Sweden deciding to take by far the highest level of migrants per capita in Europe. In 2015, they took 163,000 migrants. That's in contrast to the last 12 months where they've just taken 8,000. Again, lessons learned. Quite incredible that it's also taken them so long to realise, I guess because of public pressure on politicians, that perhaps it wasn't such a good idea. And also, I'm afraid, and this might not be a particularly popular opinion, but I'm sure with some of our viewers and listeners it will be, it does show indelibly and demonstrably a link between migration and crime, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, I think you've just, stated that case very clearly in terms of what's happened in a society which has traditionally been low crime and become one that is high crime, and what's changed is the composition of that society. So it doesn't take a genius to work out cause and effect in this regard. Now, the real problem is that we have had a political class across Europe who've been complicit in this, of both left and right, for so long. And they've done it for, in their view, the best of interest. The position has always been, we need low-skilled migrants coming into our countries because they'll do the jobs that nobody else will do. We've had our own population problems, all the rest of it. And, of course, there is, you can make an economic argument for migration. You can do that. But you can't make that economic case without also considering the economic costs of migration, because, lots of low-skilled migrants don't end up paying their way. They, in fact, bring, benefits, family members. If you're on low income, you, of course, have a whole range of benefits you also get in that sense. So you're going to have that economic cost to it as well. And you've got the social costs and the infrastructure costs and all the rest of it if you don't integrate them properly, which no European country has managed to do. So you've got an unbroken record of failure, politicians who refuse to address this, and as a result, the public is getting increasingly skittish across Europe about this issue.
So Sweden may be being a bit late to the party, of course, because up until a year or so ago, they were welcoming all and sundry, all refugees welcome with open arms. The rest of Europe, of course, except Britain, also going the same way, the likes of Hungary, Poland, and now, of course, France, Italy, very, very famously, realising, as you say, perhaps too late, that an open door policy and letting anyone and everyone in, particularly if you don't attempt to culturally integrate, is really not a good idea. Let's just read what Johan Fossel, who's Sweden's migration minister, says. He's the architect of this so-called seismic shift. He says, "We are implementing what we describe as a paradigm shift in Swedish migration policy, and we are doing this with a very outspoken agenda that we want to limit the number of people seeking asylum here in Sweden." He explained that the move does not mean that the country does not like migrants or understand the situation they face, but because it is impossible to manage the task of integration when there is such a huge influx each year. Well, I would suggest that the Swedish government should have realised that would be the unintended consequence before they decided to open the doors, because, of course, it's not politicians that bear the brunt of this. It's ordinary people, isn't it? A bit like here.
Of course it is, and that's the reality. It's local communities that are disrupted, affected, that are changed, totally transformed beyond comprehension by this sort of manoeuvre. And it is happening here. I was just looking yesterday at a chart of social housing in this country, and the percentage of social housing in the big cities that is now going to people who were born not in the UK, is in many places in excess of 50%.
Or something like 70+% of all Somalian immigrants to Britain live in social housing. So if you are currently British and on the waiting list, as 1.2 million of you are, think about that when your local authority says, sorry, no room at the inn, there's no house for you. Over 70% of Somalian immigrants to Britain are currently in social housing. You might want to ask your local authority why they were given priority over and above you.
Well, you might, and you'll find that the reason is a national legislation brought in, unfortunately, by the last Conservative government that says you've got to deal with homelessness in this degree. Doesn't matter where you put it in that way. However, local councils have a tremendous ability also to affect who gets on that ladder and who they want to prioritise in that setup as well. So the questions need to be asked to local councils as well as national government as to why this policy is being enacted in such a discriminatory way.
Yeah.
And it's a big problem.
Well, let's see when Britain follows suit. I suspect it won't be under this government. It will be under the next one. So we've only got till 2029 to wait for us to act on our illegal and indeed legal migration problems with regard to all of the issues that face us as a consequence of this open door policy of ours, which it clearly is, with regard to the social consequences, the economic and financial consequences, and indeed crime and cultural issues. Going to take another break now. When we come back, we're going to speak to James Heal, who's a political correspondent at The Spectator, to talk about social care and the fact that social care as a solution, or the solutions to social care and its problems, have been rather kicked down the road by this government. Back after this, I'm Russell Quirk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. I'm here till 1 o'clock. Also ably joined by my presenter's friend, Dr. Alan Mendoza. So we will be chatting up until 1 o'clock about all of the issues and news stories of the day with guaranteed opinion. And talking of which, let's speak now to James Heal, who's the political correspondent at The Spectator. Lots to talk to James about. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Russell.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good. Sorry, I can hardly hear you, actually. Hang on, let me just try. Yes, yeah, James, can you hear me okay? That's better, that's better. Right, let's talk about social care, first of all. So this is, I think, the rather unexpected announcement by government today that despite their promises to fix the problems of social care, which of course is affecting more and more people in this country, particularly as we get older, and therefore, I guess, become more of a burden, the surprising news that the Labour government are going to kick the can down the road with regard to any seeming solution. 2028 is what they're talking about now. I mean, we're only just in 2025, so another 3 years to wait for a remedy. That wasn't in their manifesto, James, was it?
No, absolutely. And of course, Labour was elected on a pledge that they would go after these big issues that the Tories had kicked the can down the road on. And yet, of course, perhaps the biggest long-term time bomb facing this country, one that's been deferred by endless governments, they've now chosen to themselves delay. And you think 2028 is going to be a difficult year for them. By that point in the electoral cycle, you'd be looking to kind of have all the barnacles off the boat, as it were. You'd be looking to go into an election year with not much controversy. And yet you can clearly see how, you know, if this happens in 2028, you'll have it deferred again to 2030 if Labour win power again. And thereafter, will it ever get solved?
Yeah, unlikely, I think, isn't it? Let's be honest, that Labour will be... I mean, maybe they're going to have a late surge in 2028 and impress us all that all of the things that they actually said that they were going to do in their manifesto upon which they got elected, they end up doing. You know, things like cutting waiting lists, cutting immigration, not taxing pretty much everybody despite what label they put on them. But anyway, that's for another time, I'm sure. So, yeah, this is very, very concerning, though. The fact that they're saying it's going to take 3 years, it is kicking the can down the road. It's another commission of which, of course, they have instigated many, a bit like the quangos that, of course, they have already put in place. It seems to me that Labour are already out of ideas 6 months into government, James.
Well, are they also prepared to wrestle with the hard politics of this? And, you know, this morning, Wes Streeting, who's considered one of the Cabinet's better communicators, was out there saying, you know, there are good policy choices, but there's no good politics. Well, that is the whole point. When to govern is to choose. And I think some people are now asking in Labour, you know, Wes Streeting is a great communicator, but is he going to be able to back this up with serious delivery on this? And so he was handed the health brief, including, of course, the sort of lesser overlooked sister of the healthcare system, which is the care system, promised to have a national care system. And yet I think people are a bit disappointed that we're going to wait until 2028. Yes, we'll see a 2026 interim report, but frankly, given the scale of these problems, the fact that we've had a report in 1999, 2011, 2017, Boris Johnson as well, all these different reports and promises, I think lots of people think this is ever going to get solved.
And why is it so difficult? Why is it so tricky? I mean, is it that broken that it needs to literally be blown up by way of some kind of creative destruction and reset? I mean, why is it so difficult, this problem of social care in Britain?
There's two reasons, one of which is obviously the policies involved in it. Everything about the care system is under pressure. You now have local councils, local authorities who spend more than 50% of their budget. Some of them, it's something like 75% of their budgets purely on social care. So there is a social care system with bin collection attached, as it were. And also there's things such to do with the vacancies in the system. So there's 150,000 vacancies that they need to fill. We're obviously having a big debate right now about immigration. That's going to come down in the future. But of course, unions will be pushing Labour for more social care visas. And the second point, of course, Russell, is the politics of it all, which is that every time a party goes into an election campaign promising to overhaul the social care sector, they get it beaten back at them by the opposition. So 2010, the Tories went after Andy Burnham for his so-called death tax. 2017, it was Theresa May with the so-called dementia tax. Every time a party tries to go into a campaign on this issue, they can't get it, sell it to the electorate. And that is why it needs to be done well before a campaign, which is why campaigners today are so frustrated by the fact they're waiting until 2028, when we all know, frankly, Labour will be campaigning for re-election very heavily.
So what we're saying is that the electorate, voters, don't want to pay for social care for those of us that are getting older and sicker?
Yeah, that is completely correct. And there was previously a cap proposed in the Dilnot review for £86,000, anywhere up to that. After that, the government would cover the cost of it. And I think that it really shows is that we have a real issue in terms of the demographics of our country, getting a lot older as a population. And frankly, people don't want to pay that. And for a long time, the debate has been around, having the taxes of America and the wealth provision of Europe. Increasingly, the UK has to make a decision on this, and we don't want higher taxes.
Although, ironically, of course, when it comes to making so-called tough decisions with regard to vulnerable members of society, so things like people like the WASPy women and, of course, the winter fuel allowance being taken away from pensioners, the Labour Party doesn't hesitate to make those decisions. It's a bit at odds with this, isn't it?
Well, I think that some decisions are sort of easy to pull a lever and, you can quite easily remove pension credit, for instance, winter fuel from pensioners, for instance. That is a fairly quick decision you can make. You can argue whether it's right or wrong. But then in terms of social care, the problem is there's sort of morass, and it's like sort of trying to untangle a ball of wool where everything leads to another string, another end. And that is why successive ministers, frankly, have ducked the challenge.
Yeah. Care England, of course, here have said that the Commission was in danger of becoming yet another report that gathers dust while the sector crumbles. I think that's a fair point, isn't it? And it added that people in care today cannot afford to wait any longer because their lives depend on action now. So I guess we could label this as rather insensitive on the part of Labour, not just incompetent, not just kicking the can and the decisions down the road, but a matter of competence, which I'm still waiting for Labour to display some of somewhere. Let's talking of Labour, 20 Labour councillors have just quit in Broxtowe, which is Broxtowe Borough Council in Nottinghamshire, in objection to Keir Starmer's leadership. Now, this is interesting. Just 6 months in what we would otherwise normally know as a honeymoon period, James, 20 Labour councillors quit on the basis of Keir Starmer's leadership, and in particular his approach to things like WASPy women, things like removing the winter fuel allowance, but particularly what they cite as being an erosion, a dilution of local democracy because of this harebrained scheme, this approach by Labour by way of so-called devolution, which will render many local authorities absorbed by other bigger authorities, where it's said that some people will end up living as far as 50 miles away from their town hall as a consequence of Angela Rayner's decision to consolidate local councillors and local councils. This is, I think, an appalling attempt at diluting democracy, and it's something that these 20 Labour councillors have got a point on, I think, isn't it?
I think on the latter point, you've got to remember how potentially politically important local government can be. You think of the Heath legacy, Edward Heath's government's legacy, 50 years on. What do you remember it for? Well, primarily it's take us into Europe, the trade unions, but thereafter that it's probably the Local Government Reorganisation Act of 1972, which abolished a lot of historic counties. Then, of course, you fast forward 18 years, you get the poll tax, which brought down Margaret Thatcher. The issue of local government finance, not a particularly sexy topic, but it brought down the longest-serving Prime Minister of the 20th century. And so what this sort of history suggests is that actually what is on paper a technical reorganisation can actually have a lot of significance to people across the country. As you say, Russell, people are discovering the importance of local services in terms of having a local provision there. They may not like their local council necessarily, but they support its right to exist. And so it can be very difficult, I think, for a Labour Party that goes into this just promising to abolish it in such a way. Actually, I think there could be lots of political consequences from it. On this terms of the Broxtowe councillors, I think it was interesting, partly they cited that. I think it'll be interesting to see how there's lots of tensions, as I understand it, between behind the scenes in terms of some Labour about who agrees with this and who doesn't, in terms of who's going out for re-election, but also in terms of the policy issues. And I think Keir Starmer has been, I think if you talk to local authorities, in some ways a bit of a disappointment. And I think
that's an understatement, James.
I mean, this is well, I think this a Labour point of view, I think there's a sense perhaps that they wasted 6 months, as it were. And so, it's no surprise that they're seeing like this. Although, of course, you have to temper that by acknowledging there'll be parochial and personal concerns as well as political ones too. Yeah.
Let's just read what Milan Radulovic, who is the council leader at Broxtowe. Now, of course, they have now, as part of their resignation, have formed an independent group called the Broxtowe Independence Group. He has torn up his Labour membership card after 42 2 years. So a Labour Party member, he's been through all sorts. He's been through, Foot, Callaghan, Corbyn, the whole thing. And despite all of those ups and downs, has decided to take this opportunity to resign his membership after 42 years. He says he's deeply saddened to quit, but had found himself in an impossible position. I cannot support, he says, and will not support another centrist government. Well, I'm not sure it's centrist, but anyway, let's leave that. Intent on destroying local democracy and dictating national policy from a high pedestal. He says, I believe the concentration of power in the hands of fewer people and the abolition of local democracy through the current proposals of super councils is nothing short of dictatorship. What does this mean for Keir Starmer, James? I mean, seriously, we're 6 months in. This is the beginning of the rot setting in, isn't it? As soon as you lose your grassroots, whether it be members, whether it be people on the ground that would otherwise be delivering leaflets or whatever, but particularly councillors and losing control of councils, is this the beginning of the end for Keir Starmer?
No, I don't think we're at that point, but it is potentially the early onset of midterm blues, which is that when you get to these local council elections, given how poorly Labour performed in the last one of these in 2021, back when Boris Johnson was at his peak, you'd therefore expect Labour potentially to actually, if not necessarily make huge gains, make some modest ones, or maybe only make a few losses. But actually, the way things are going, it does look like reform is very well placed in certain areas to pick up from different parts of the country. So I think that actually it's going to be a portent of things to come. I suspect 2025 isn't the year when, for instance, we see Starmer in a full-on proper crisis. But I do think that if we get to the end of this year and the much promised, much fabled economic growth hasn't materialised, as it looks likely with the front page of the Financial Times today warning that tax rises are inevitable, then I think those questions will start going from being local concerns to articulated at the national level in Parliament.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think the rot has started to be set in. Let's see what happens, particularly in local elections, although Keir Starmer, of course, and the Labour government doing everything they can to try and postpone, delay and cancel local elections because they know that they'll be wiped out this May if they let them continue. But hey, look, that's, I think, what we used to call democracy. James Hill, political correspondent from The Spectator, thank you very much indeed, as ever. Going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Norman Brennan, one of our favourite former police officers, about car theft and the fact that if you get your car nicked, you've got very, very little chance of it being recovered or indeed the person that stole it being found and taken through the judicial process. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. Back after this.
Well, my response to all these events is to wait and to discover much more about them than we could possibly know at this stage. to rule nothing out. Of course, it is perfectly possible the events are linked and that there is some terrorist element, but it's also possible that they're not, and that there might be some other reason involved. I'm very reluctant to get involved in any speculation about what this is about until we know a great deal more about the perpetrators and about the background.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. I'm here with you till 1 o'clock. Let me know your thoughts on what we're talking about today. 0344 499 1000. Do get involved. Give me a call. We don't bite. Love to hear from you. Also, text messages, which we're getting lots and lots of, by the way, to 87222. The word Talk plus your message. Let me just read some to you, actually, particularly about social care. Amanda says, the problem is when young, you never believe that one day you will be old and need care. Far more should be done to as a limit to put on the time mayors can serve, and certainly not reward failure, she says. Well, OK, she changed gears there, didn't she, mid-text? And also Peter from Croydon says on the subject of social care, my mother went to hospital with a broken ankle in July, which did not need surgery. She then went into a care home for rehabilitation for about 9 or 10 weeks. So we thought, unfortunately, she's still in the care home at a cost to the NHS of £1,000 a week. Social care is and will always be a shambles. And I think, actually, that's Peter in Croydon, I think another example of how those on the left keep bleating about money, more money for the NHS, more money for social care. Most of the problems within those organisations, by my contention, is simply people. The lack of organisation. We're going to be talking about the NHS a bit later on, actually, in terms of the huge increase in managers' salaries by just over £1 billion over the last 10 years, with, frankly, no better outcomes whatsoever to anything that they're targeted with succeeding at. And I think the social care sector is exactly the same. It's surely just a question of better organisation, better efficiency, more accountability, rather than it just being something that we chuck taxpayers' money at. Talking of taxpayers' money, we're going to talk now to Norman Brennan, former police officer, friend of the show, about car theft. Because car theft is something that affects more and more and more of us. It's certainly been something that I have been subjected to, and I'll tell you that story as we go on. Also, Alan Mendoza here has got his stories, and I'm afraid they are plural by the sounds of it, with regard to his experience of car theft. And shock data reveals that on average, apparently, we hear today, 78.5% of all car thefts go unsolved. There's about 100,000 of them in Britain a year now. Norman, thanks for joining the show.
Good morning.
Have the police given up on car theft?
I don't think they've given up. They just can't cope. They can barely cope with everyday crime. Most response officers in every force in Britain normally go from one grade 1 call, which is a 999 call, to the next, and they regularly don't get enough time to investigate crimes. Some will have 20 or 30 separate crimes to investigate, as well as having to deal with their everyday policing jobs. And in London, Russell, as you probably know, there's rarely a day or a weekend where thousands of police officers are not dragged away from their own policing boroughs to police demonstrations, and that further delays them investigating crime. But these are dreadful statistics. 78.5% of vehicle crimes not solved. Pretty much similar to burglary. We just haven't got the officers, and we're 18,000 police officers short from the population growth from 2009.
But Norman, is it true that we don't have the officers? I mean, yes, police officer recruitment has not kept up with the increasing population. Of course, the population is growing, as we know, from a net migration perspective by 900,000 people a year. But we now have more police officers on the streets than ever. But the trouble is they're not on the streets, are they? I mean, where are they hiding? There's 147,000 of them across Britain. You say that it's a resource issue, but there are more police officers in Britain now than ever before. I'm not quite sure what they're doing.
Well, we haven't got the officers to cope. It's as simple as that. I mean, crime has exploded exponentially across Britain, and just the average shoplifter, when they're arrested, and they're rarely ever arrested, Russell, takes up an entire shift of a police officer. So say you've got, for example, 6 police officers on duty, 2 are out on patrol and they arrest a shoplifter. They're back at the police station. Another one's going round taking a statement from a burglary victim, and another one's protecting a scene of a car crash where someone sadly has died, and the other one is his own or her own. You have one officer sometimes policing an entire county. But that Norman, is how bad it is.
No, Norman, I get that. I mean, it sounds like not just a resource issue, but an organisation issue. Why can't the police employ civilians who need less training and earn less to look after the booking and processing of shoplifters and prisoners? I mean, on the rare occasion that a shoplifter is actually arrested, by the way.
I completely agree. It's what I've said for years. What should happen is that you rightly say, and I rightly believe, and how the public would want it, is that every police officer should be on the beat for the maximum amount of hours that they possibly can be. If you make an arrest, go back to the police station, download your body-worn camera and hand it over to a civilian expert at interviewing and dealing with the paperwork, and you get back out on there.
Yeah. So what sort of percentage do we think police officers spend on the beat versus doing admin? You know, maybe not just processing people that they've arrested, but, you know, admin that would be largely unnecessary. Maybe, you know, filling in forms in triplicate, dealing, I don't know, with, you know, monthly diversity reports to demonstrate the ethnicity of the people that they've arrested and processed, and all of that other nonsense. I mean, how much time is actually spent by way of police officer time on the streets, on the beat, rather than admin?
A huge amount doing paperwork and admin, waiting for solicitors to come along, as you rightly pointed out just then, dealing with paperwork, getting an interview room, getting details from the CPS with a view of charging or not. A huge amount is done as a result of bureaucracy. But it was pretty much like that when I was in, but we attended every call. Something has seriously gone wrong and it needs to be looked into. But I'm afraid the policing are lost at the moment. And just as a caveat, and I think you're going to tell your story, Russell, there, a friend of mine owns one of the biggest chauffeur companies in London. In Essex once, he had an £80,000 BMW stolen in the morning, and Essex police had closed the case by lunchtime that day. Another one of his Range Rovers was stolen in Hackney, and he traced it on his tracker to 4 streets away. He called the Met Police and they said, we have got no one to attend. There's £100,000, supposing that was a robbery. You've got a £100,000 vehicle on their area, but they've got no officer to attend. So he diverted another one of his vehicles to go and sit with that vehicle so it could be kept safe. Well, by the time that person got there, the tracker had been moved and the vehicle was gone, never to be seen again. Just 2 crimes, 180,000 quid's worth.
And no wonder the car theft is on the up, is because those that seek to carry out such crimes know that they have very, very little chance of being caught in the act, or indeed caught afterwards. I mean, you talk about Essex, that's where I live. It's got so bad where I live now that the residents of the development on which I live, we've now had to employ private security because we never, and I mean never, see a police officer. I've lived in the same house for 5 years in Hutton in Essex. I have never seen a police car or a police person on the beat anywhere near where I live. So we've now had to employ at our own expense the services of a private security company, which actually has made a huge difference. But whenever previous to that cars were stolen on my development, which would literally be on a weekly basis, what we would immediately get would be a text or an email with a crime reference number, a couple of updates, and that was it. I mean, it almost seems as though car theft, even though it is hardly a victimless crime, it's been deprioritised by the police.
I agree. It really is unacceptable, and we need 38,000 more officers to actually take the streets back. The police have lost it.
And Norman, I would be happy, and I'm sure most people would, to pay for that. You know, I'm a low tax kind of guy, but I would actually be very, very happy to pay a little bit more tax if it was guaranteed to be spent on police officers. Norman, got to leave it there. Thank you very much for your insight. What do you think of this? 0344 499 1000. Are you the victim of car crime? Most of you would have been. Let me know your experience. 0344 499 1000, or indeed you can text me 87222. I will be back after this. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. Shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in or ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk and I'm here till 1 o'clock. We were talking at the top of the show at 10 o'clock with regard to this news that Labour has blocked a grooming gang inquiry. So let's call them what they are, by the way, rape gangs, largely Pakistani rape gangs, raping underage white girls. This has been an epidemic over several decades. It has been covered up. It has been kicked into the long grass insofar as the rightful investigations that should have ensued by a succession of politicians, councillors, council leaders, councils, and of course senior police officers. It is something that we should be most concerned about, particularly as Labour has now decided not to accept the premise of a proper government inquiry, particularly into Keir Starmer's conduct, because, of course, he was the head of public prosecutions, the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, at the time when this started to break at around 2012. Quick one from you, Alan, on this. Do you think Labour are justified in kicking this into the long grass?
No, of course not. I mean, you know, how can you justify this big national issue that everyone is speaking about, where you know, young children are being abused on a regular basis, have been and are still being abused? We know that's still happening. How can you say you can kick that into, you know, the long grass and say, oh, local councils have to handle it? It's a national question that is happening across the country. By its very definition, this is national. The government are, you know, not taking up the responsibility.
And not just national, international. I think Elon Musk has had something to say about this as well. Obviously, he's quite a vocal chap these days. This is what Wes Streeting had to say about that.
Some of the criticisms that Elon Musk has made, I think, are misjudged and certainly misinformed, but we're willing to work with Elon Musk, who I think has got a big role to play with his social media platform to help us and other countries to tackle this serious issue. So if he wants to work with us and roll his sleeves up, we'd welcome that.
Well, a bit of an olive branch there from Wes Streeting, which is in deference to most of the Labour front bench, who seem just to want to attack him as they have Donald Trump over the years. So, well, yes, fair play to Wes Streeting, I suppose. Some of you might think it's inappropriate for someone that's South African and now a resident of the United States to comment, but I think we should welcome all such debate and probes over, well, what is undoubtedly a huge failing of those in power over many, many decades. OK, look, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk to William Clouston now, who's leader of the SDP, about a number of things, including social care, the NHS, and, of course, those 20 Labour councillors that have just quit because of Keir Starmer's leadership. Let's not sugarcoat it. They are miffed with Keir Starmer already, just 6 months into his hapless government. William, thanks for joining me on Talk.
Good to be here.
Tell us about the SDP, first of all, William Clouston, because many people think that you were kind of absorbed into the Liberal Democrats a few years ago, but you're still alive and kicking by the looks of it, as an organisation, I mean.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, it's an interesting story. Social democracy is different from liberalism, and we are the SDP, the members that resisted the merger with the Liberals. We survived, and in the last few years, we've been growing rapidly. So we had 20 candidates at the 2019 general election, 122 candidates last year, and we're growing and starting to win seats, taking seats off Labour in the big cities in the likes of Leeds and so on. So I'm very optimistic about the future.
Well, let's see what you stand for with regard to a range of issues that we're going to talk about. So first of all, Labour's decision to block this inquiry, this government inquiry into rape gangs. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's a disgrace. People have reservations about Musk getting involved in this, but frankly, anything that can bring this atrocity to public attention would be welcome, given that the establishment, the political parties, the major political parties, and many of the authorities have just mishandled this and pretended it's not happening. It's a disgrace.
Yeah, and often we need a loud voice, someone with influence, to get involved in order for sufficient light to be shone on such things, so that indeed they do get debated, but also that we get to the bottom of who is culpable. As I said on the show yesterday, those that are culpable here, whether they are council officers, council leaders, other politicians or senior police officers, should be taken through the legal process. They should be charged if there is evidence for such, prosecuted and imprisoned, because they themselves have allowed this to continue. So people, women, girls, would have continued to have been raped and assaulted because of the inaction by many of those in power. So yes, no, I thought you'd find it difficult to disagree with me with regard to Labour. So it'll only be Labour supporters that will defend Jess Phillips and Keir Starmer's decision. Let's talk about social care, something else that the Labour government seemed to be pretty hapless about. They promised in the run-up to the election that they would fix the problems of social care, the social care crisis, as I think they called it several times in Parliament, but have now decided that it's not worth fixing until 2028.
I think this is one of the most depressing announcements I've heard from this Labour government. It fills me with horror. It's about 14 years since Andrew Dilnot gave his report on social care, and nothing has been done by these useless establishment parties. The Tories and the Lib Dem coalition did nothing about it. The Labour Party have an opportunity, Russell. You know what their majority is? 174. 174 majority, and they're kicking this issue into the long grass.
And William, what would the SDP do differently then?
We would create a national care service. We know what the problems are. I mean, for Streeting and others to say, well, we should ask Baroness Casey to find out what the issue is. We know what the issue is. The issue is a patchy service. The service is basically stuck between NHS care for the very ill and local authorities picking up the tab in their areas, but the service that local authorities offer is very, very patchy. There is no national training plan. There is no solution to the funding crisis where people have to sell their homes and so on. We propose, the SDP proposes quite sensibly, a national care service to get a grip of this. And actually Labour has also has a similar policy, but is not, and it actually has the power to do something about it, is not doing anything about it. It's a disgrace. The Labour Party have put this into the long grass. Nothing, due to the timescales now, will be done before the next general election.
Well, it won't be done this Parliament, of course. That's pretty obvious. And I think that's, you could be forgiven for being cynical that that's being done on purpose, because they believe that any solution will be potentially unpopular, particularly when it comes to taxation, albeit that the Labour Party don't seem to be that shy of raising tax. And with regard to money, of course, whether it's the NHS or it's the social care system, it does seem that despite cries from particularly those on the left for more and more money as the remedy for the problems within our public health and social care services, NHS managers are reported now to be earning another £1.1 billion in the last 10 years, taking manager salaries in the NHS to nearly £3 billion, but with absolutely no improvement in outcomes as a consequence whatsoever. Doesn't that rather indicate and prove that the problems of the NHS and indeed social care are one of not money, but organisation and efficiency?
I think organisation does matter. I think in the case of social care, you can't argue that money isn't an issue. It certainly is an issue. On the question of NHS managers, it is true, as you say, Russell, the total salary bill has gone up 70% in 10 years, and it's not clear to me or anyone else that the NHS is better managed as a result.
Well, it's clear to me that it isn't. I mean, when it comes to those things that have been targeted for those managers, I mean, although they're soft targets, there'll be no implication, there'll be no consequence for those managers for failing to hit those targets, whether it's cancer diagnosis and outcomes, whether it's waiting lists and so on. It seems that those managers have just taken the money and stuck two fingers up to outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, it's highly contested, this area. The salary bill's gone up and the number of NHS managers has gone up. The data on NHS productivity shows that it's fallen, so it's not working. I think actually it's not. I think there is a cultural issue here. I think some experts, Darzi said that the NHS is not overmanaged. The NHS Foundation claim that it's not overmanaged. But I think there is a cultural problem, Russell. I think right the way through local authorities and government in general, you've got a problem with direct decision-making. I think you have people who are inclined to pass the buck and not make a decision. If you go back to the 1950s, most hospitals were controlled by the almoner or a single manager who would make executive decisions directly about a whole range of things, and that was highly efficient. Now, before they can make a decision, they're inclined to say, well, let's get a consultant in to tell us what to do. So I think a lot of the problem, Russell, is actually not so much money, but culture, the culture of the management itself.
Yeah, well, and the lack of accountability, and get this as well. The figures within that £1.1 billion additional spend that relate to what are termed managers and senior managers. They are people with a salary in management terms of between £77,000 and £90,000. Now, putting aside the fact that I'm sure within those managers, that increase in number of managers in the NHS, there'll be the obligatory diversity and inclusion officers, those that run around with clipboards making sure that everything's nice and equal, inverted commas. But that's an astonishing amount of money for managers to be earning without any accountability in terms of the outcomes, the so-called successes that they are tasked with managing and overseeing. £77,400 up to £90,000 as an NHS manager. Talk about rewarding failure.
Yeah, I'm going to take your point entirely on the diversity, inclusion, equity posts. The SDP has a policy on that. Scrap the lot. They are divisive, they're not useful, and it's not just the cost of the post, Russell. It's not just the cost of the post itself. It's the cost that those people impose on the rest of the organisation, which is running around trying to do their work, basically, and getting on with the core function. So I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
You'll never get to a situation where, you can't rationally argue that something as big as the NHS shouldn't be managed. It needs to be managed, but I think the cultural problem is the biggest one. We have people in the SDP policy team who have worked at a very senior level in the NHS, and they'll vouch that. They say basically...
Wes Streeting also has said that those hospitals that do not perform, despite the increase in funding, will be called out. What I would suggest to Mr Streeting is that the individuals should be called out, not just the hospitals, but the clipboard carriers, the managers, and indeed the NHS Trust chief executives. They are the one that should have the finger of blame poked at them, because they're the ones that are clearly failing. Can we talk about Sweden for a second, William? You may have heard the earlier segment where we were talking about Sweden's sudden pang of common sense. They have spent a decade or so allowing all and sundry into their country, hundreds of thousands of migrants, some legal and no doubt some illegal, many on the basis of them claiming asylum in Sweden. And lo and behold, over the last 10 years, particularly when it comes to serious crime, so assault, arson, explosions, criminality by way of gangs, Sweden has in effect fallen. I mean, literally fallen under the weight of that migration. And they've now decided, yes, not before time, that they're going to close the doors. They're going to pull up the drawbridge when it comes to asylum claims, and indeed giving benefits and money to such claimants. As a consequence, they've now seen a significant reduction in asylum applications, the lowest since 1997. When is Britain going to do the same?
Well, it should do it immediately. I mean, what's happened? Sweden wanted to be some sort of humanitarian superpower and engaged in this reckless experiment. It's been going on 30 years, but in 2016 it was supercharged. And you're quite right, the result is failure to integrate the people that have arrived, a rise in gun crime and mafia activity, to the extent that a lot of Swedes don't feel safe in their own communities, in their own cities. So it's collapsed.
So can we join the dots, William? I mean, can we say safely, on the record now, that there is absolutely a link between migration into European countries from other cultures and countries and crime?
Of course, because that's what the data says. And the states that have the data collectible and publishable, it always demonstrates that. Certain groups are vastly overrepresented in the crime stats for not just robberies, but for violent crime and rapes and other things. And the data's in there. Some states, France in particular, the UK is not very good at publishing data on this.
Well, we don't. I mean, Rupert Lowe from Reform has insisted that the government does so, and he's been resisted. Do you support him in his endeavours to have crime filtered by way of the data that's published by nationality?
I want the data published, and I applaud Rupert Lowe. I think he's done an excellent job since coming to Parliament. He's done a better job than the entire Tory party has in opposing the government. No, I think you can't, rationally, Russell, you can't have evidence-based policy if you don't have the evidence. And I want the evidence there, and I want it published. But Sweden, get back to Sweden's case. This has been a reckless experiment. It's failed. And basically, the worm is turning. The optimistic thing is that states that want to tackle it and reverse this experiment can do so. And I applaud the Swedes on doing it. I think it's long overdue. All of the reports that are published now, it's not just the crime and the other failures to integrate. The cost to the public purse, Russell, of some of these immigrant groups is colossal. There was a report published a couple of years ago by Jan van der Beek at the University of Amsterdam, and they estimated that some asylum migrant groups are costing the states they go to per person over €500,000.
Yeah, so over the lifetime of that person.
Over the lifetime of that person in that state. And, you know, most of these European states, Russell, are running public sector deficits. We can't afford this. We can't afford to borrow to do this.
But we have to have a realisation then, particularly in this country, as Sweden has just had the revelation that not all immigration is good and positive. William, we've got to leave it there, I'm afraid. William Clouston, leader of the SDP, thank you very much indeed for joining me. We're going to take a break and back to talk about the weather. The NHS say don't go out because there might be a bit of snow. What a load of old nonsense. I'm Russell Quirk, back after this.
story incorrectly. Starmer himself didn't go on the toboggan, which is now world famous, and I'd never heard of it before yesterday. It's apparently a 2-kilometre long ride, which takes 10 minutes, so it's at least a little bit better if you're going to queue for 3 hours. And the idea, nonetheless, that you can go and jump the queue is wrong, when there's a much better thing to do, which is to say, look, kids, if you really want to go and do this, great, I'll pay for you. Yeah, you go there, you queue, and by the way, a smart spin doctor would say, and we leave the story afterwards.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk, here till 1 o'clock. Let me know what you think about what we are discussing this morning and into early afternoon. 0344 499 1000, or you can do what lots of people have done and send a text to 87222, message after the word talk. Sean from Grimsby says, these politicians from both parties don't give two hoots about the victims of the Muslim rape gangs or the cover-up that's been going on for decades. I believe that they believe it's a small price to pay for diversity and inclusion. And Sean, yes, well, we know that that's true because Greater Manchester Police said that they didn't want to investigate through fear of inciting racial tensions. Bobby says, was it all an act with Jess Phillips? Was it all a publicity stunt? But of course, when push comes to shove, she now refuses an inquiry. Although every year she stands up on International Women's Day and reads the names of victims. Is all this done just for the cameras or for her fan base? And of course, she doesn't want an inquiry into these grooming gangs because she needs theirs and their families' vote for Labour in her constituency. Well, yes, it's a combination of both, isn't it? It's a combination of grandstanding in opposition, because you don't have to cash the cheques that you write out, and also pandering to, in her case, her predominantly Muslim voter base. Yes, of course. OK, changing gears, let's talk about the weather. There's a weather warning, I'll have you know. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware, but about this time of year, every year, about kind of January, February, we have a thing called winter. Winter happens where it seems that temperatures drop, we start to get a bit of snow, it gets a bit slippery and icy underfoot. And of course the NHS, rather than worrying about waiting lists and queues of ambulances outside A&E and actually dealing with an epidemic of cancer outcomes not meeting targets and so on, what they've decided to do is to issue us all with a nanny state-like warning, which effectively is to say that we should not go outside because if it's snowing or threatening to snow, you might slip over. I think this is more testimony, actually, with regard to the NHS, to them not wanting you to visit them because, of course, they're so badly organised that they probably wouldn't be able to see you. So this is nanny statism wrapped up in protectionism, I guess, from the point of view of the NHS organisation. So should we be worried about the weather? Let's talk now then to John Hammond, who's a meteorologist for Weather Trending. John, should we be scared of the winter? Are we about to be hit by some huge, deep ice age that's going to grind the country to a halt, or is this overkill?
Well, for some parts of the country, Russell, I think a foot of snow is likely to hinder people in their voyage out and about over the next few days. But of course, not all of us are going to see a foot of snow. In fact, most of us will not. So I think the warnings, in many cases, are justified. For a few places, I think the warnings may be a little bit over the top, and you may see over the next few hours, Russell, the warning areas being curtailed somewhat. So just to give you a brief summary without boring you with regions and warnings and timings and all this sort of jazz, the main focus is tomorrow evening and into Sunday, and that is when it's going to start snowing across southern England. Now, if you live across southern England, don't get too excited. It's not going to be the blizzard of the century, but there will be a covering of snow, I think, through the latter part of tomorrow across southern counties, possibly including the London area. That has prompted a yellow warning, rightly or wrongly. That's prompted a yellow warning, which then extends all the way through Sunday. Now, I think that will be curtailed because any snow that does fall across the South Russell will soon turn back to rain. And by the time most of us are up on Sunday morning, it will have vanished. So, yeah, a blink and you miss it snowfall event across southern counties of England. It's a different story, Russell, further north. And that's where the Met Office have just issued an amber warning. So
amber's worse than yellow, is it?
Amber is worse than yellow, and guess what? Red is worse than amber. We haven't gone red yet, but watch this space.
What does red mean? Maybe a whole inch of snow?
Red would involve probably a foot or more of snow, and actually the amber warning caters for the prospect of a foot of snow through Sunday across higher elevations of the Pennines, possibly Snowdonia, possibly the Peak District. So the amber actually covers much of the Midlands, much of Wales, and much of northern England as well. I think it is
John,
northern England.
Let me ask you, how did we ever survive? How did my generation? I mean, how did I get to the ripe old age?
And my generation, Russell.
Yeah, well, how did I get to the ripe old age of 57? I mean, I remember standing.
You're
at the
a youngster.
Bus stop. I am, but I'm old enough to remember, standing in the late 70s and early 80s at a bus stop in a blizzard, waiting for the double decker to turn up, which it then did to take me and my school children, my school colleagues, to school. There was never a snow day or a bus that didn't turn up, and we never had yellow, amber or red weather warnings. How on earth did we survive the 70s and 80s?
I don't know. You'll have to ask the people who issue the warnings.
Well, but aren't the warnings pathetic and an absolute waste of time? I mean, let's take the example of Hogmanay in Scotland. So New Year's Eve cancelled because I think the winds got up as much as 20 miles per hour.
They got higher than that, but I take your point. Listen, I'm not gonna stand here and defend the warnings. That is not my department. I'll tell you what the weather's going to do. But if you want to have a go at the people who issue the warnings, then speak to someone who issues the warnings. You make a good point about the fact that 30, 40 years ago we didn't have warnings, but then probably without the warnings there were more fatalities. We just didn't hear about them.
Well, and I'm afraid, look, John, we've got to wrap up. There's going to be more, not through slipping over, but because pensioners are about to have their winter fuel allowance taken from them. That is something that we should be most concerned about. So not just the NHS issuing warnings about it being shock horror, slightly slippery underfoot because it's icy and snowy. It's the fact that 4,000 pensioners are going to die because of this Labour government's approach to the winter fuel allowance being withdrawn. Quickly wrap up, John. I've got to go to a break.
Some places will see a foot of snow.
Good, can't wait. I'll get the toboggan out. John Hammond, thank you very much indeed. We will be back after this. I'm Russell.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, thanks for your company this morning and into the afternoon. I'm Russell Quirk. I'm here till 1 o'clock. Still joined by Alan Mendoza. A quick word from you with regard to the last piece, weather warnings and so on.
Well, meteorologists are the only profession other than economists where you can be more wrong than right and still be called an expert.
Yes.
How many times we look at the forecast, it's nothing to do with what they've said.
Good point.
London this Sunday, 13 degrees, no snow there.
Yeah, we'll see. OK, well, look, let's speak to Stephen Dorrell about this. Stephen is former Conservative Health Secretary, I think under the John Major government. I'm sure he'll have something to say about a range of issues that I want to raise with him, particularly these NHS warnings. Stephen, thanks for your company on Talk. Good to see you. Back in your day, so you were health minister, I think, from 95 to 97. Were you in the habit of issuing warnings about the weather so that people were told not to slip over? A bit like, you know, when it's hot and you're told that you must drink water. I mean, what sort of nanny state have we ventured into, Stephen?
Well, I do think it's a bit beyond the brief of the National Health Service to give people advice as to how to deal with hot weather or cold weather. Of course, it's true that if there's icy weather, people that you're in danger of slipping over. And most of us who've been around a few years and probably in at greatest risk of slipping over have worked out some years ago, indeed decades ago, that ice causes you to slip underfoot.
You would think that those that are vulnerable would realise such a thing. And the NHS, of course, did have some months ago an answer to this, a video that they put out suggesting how those that are perhaps elderly and more vulnerable should tackle slippery pavements. Now, those watching on YouTube now will see this. Now, this is not a parody. This is actually a video released by, I think it was Scotland NHS, to Glasgow specifically, I'm told, to inform us all how we should walk like penguins, I kid you not, like penguins, in order to avoid falling over. So this is where our resources, our time and our efforts as an NHS, this is where they're being expended. This is 4 or 5 members of the NHS outside on a slippery surface, literally walking like penguins to show us all how not to slip over. I kid you not. Stephen, this is absolute lunacy, isn't it?
Well, look, I agree with you that it's not a high priority. I think it's also, but I think we need to avoid getting too steamed up about it, if I may say so. One thing the health service is charged with, and here I think that the health service would have a good point to make, is that prevention is better than cure. I think occasionally people step over the mark and they get it wrong. But engaging in spending money to avoid people unnecessarily hurting themselves, becoming ill, needing to see a doctor, needing to go into hospital, that is a legitimate part of what the health service, and indeed an important part.
No, but Stephen, venturing into the realms of telling us how to walk and also telling us by way of some kind of lockdown-esque mandate that we should not go out because it's going to snow, that's way over and above their brief. That's beyond the pale.
Yeah,
that's nanny statism.
People get these things wrong. I'm not disputing that. What I think would be an overreaction the other way is to say that the health service shouldn't concern itself with the causes of ill health and accident, because that's exactly what it's one of the classic obligations of the health service to be involved in prevention. That's not invented by woke modernism. That goes back to Aaron Bevan in 1948 and the Attlee government.
Well, maybe, Stephen, this value for money that is being expended by the NHS in terms of this advice and these diktats is justified by the £1.1 billion extra that we're now paying NHS managers, specifically over the last 10 years or so. So the bill for such managers that are on salaries of between £70,000 and £90,000, those managers obviously have increased in number significantly in that 10 years. The bill is nearly £3 billion. I mean, it's gone up by a third in 10 years. How can that be justified?
Well, a lot of salaries have gone up by over that 10-year period. I'm not going to sit and justify individual salary levels
No, but at the same time, they failed in their outcomes. They're tasked with specific targets and goals, which they have failed at year after year after year. So why are we increasing their salaries and just throwing money at them by way of those salaries for outcomes that are unsatisfactory?
What I absolutely am going to defend is the proposition that the health service needs to invest in good managers. Now, it doesn't mean every manager that's employed in the health service is a good manager. There are some excellent managers and there are some less good managers in the health service. But the idea that you spend roughly £200 billion of public money without investing in the management required to ensure that you deliver good value for that money, I think it would be a grotesque misrepresentation of the
Stephen, what's grotesque, with respect, what's grotesque is that those managers have increased in number. Their salaries are significant, between £70,000 and £90,000. The point is that we are not getting value for money out of them because the outcomes, whether it be cancer treatment and the consequence of that cancer treatment being satisfactory in terms of survival rates, whether it be NHS waiting lists, which of course we know are at record levels, we are paying more to get less and to get worse outcomes. That's the issue. It's not the fact that we need managers. Of course we do. And we need managers that are efficient and that actually succeed in their quest to do better. It seems that those managers are doing worse and being paid more for it. That's my issue.
Well, we're careful. What's actually happening is that they're doing more, but not enough more to keep up with the demand. And that's, of course, gets
so they're
back
failing.
to the earlier bit.
So they're failing.
The earlier bit. Sorry?
They're failing. Why don't we put them on performance-related pay?
Many of them are on performance-related pay.
Well, maybe a higher proportion would be necessary because we're still not seeing satisfactory outcomes.
Because what people... the health service exists in a goldfish bowl, and there's always people who have opinions about how this or that aspect of it can be done better. And that's a legitimate issue. I don't complain about that. I think that's part of what being a public service is about. That they are accountable to the people who work in the health service, whether they're managers, whether they're clinicians, are accountable to the people who pay the bills and who rely on the services they provide.
But how are they accountable if they're earning more for worst outcomes? Where's the accountability? There is no...
The answer, and the other thing we always need to remember is that within the health service, we're not talking about a lump and mass that are all performing the same. There are some parts of the health service that perform exceptionally well. There are the majority of the health service that perform more or less in line with average, and there are some underperformers. And what the health service, where I think you do have a strong point, is that the health service isn't always good enough at identifying the underperformers and ensuring that action is taken quickly to improve the performance of those aspects of the service that are not delivering to
Stephen, I think it's easy to say that some aspects of the NHS are okay, but the problem is when it comes to those aspects of it that really matter to individual members of the public, those that sit in A&E for 10 hours, those that can't get an ambulance to their house despite having a heart attack for several hours, and that sit in ambulances outside A&E doors at an increasing rate, particularly at winter, because there's not enough organisational ability to get the people out of beds so that the people in the ambulances can get into those beds. When it comes to waiting lists, when it comes to, for instance, 1 million cancer cases missed during COVID lockdown. I mean, I think, with respect, you're making excuses for an NHS that I'm sure is very, very close to your heart. And I would suggest that because we keep making excuses for it and it sits there on a national pedestal, that is exactly why it is never probed, critiqued enough to improve.
I'm not seeking to make excuses for anybody. And I've been extremely critical of aspects of the delivery of service across different parts of the health service. What I am encouraging you to do is not to imagine that it's the same everywhere and everybody suffers from the same problems, to identify more accurately where the problems are and take action to deal with those that are problems.
Well, we could look at Wales, for instance, which, of course, under a Labour government of several years, is even worse than it is in England, particularly when it comes to waiting lists. Let's just quickly, before you go, let's talk about social care. So you would have seen this news this morning that the Labour government, in their wisdom, have decided to kick the very important issue of social care, the social care crisis, down the road. Why is it going to take them 3 years to come up with a remedy? I mean, this is not at all what we expected by way of... do you remember that manifesto that the Labour government waved in front of electorates' faces? I mean, that's rather been kind of ripped up and destroyed, I think, in many respects since they took office. But this isn't what we expected from Labour at all, is it?
I have quite a long memory on all of this. I have a memory of Boris Johnson saying he had an oven-ready deal on social care. That was in 2019. We never saw any evidence of that. It's 28 years this year since I left office as Health Secretary, and I plead guilty to not having resolved the problem of social care in a term of office that expired 28 years ago. When I saw the news this morning that we were going to spend another between 3 and 4 years thinking about a problem, the solution to the problem of social care, I was reminded that the NHS itself was founded, was set up almost exactly 3 years to the day after the day when the Attlee government took office. It took them 3 years to set up the NHS. It's apparently going to take best part of 4 years to think of a plan to what to do with social care. I don't think that really addresses the urgency of the situation properly.
And Stephen, what is the solution? I know it's you're probably not going to be able to give us that in 1 or 2 minutes on this station, but give us an overview of what you think needs to happen in terms of solution, rather than just creating commissions that will kick the can down the road.
Well, and you rightly say I can't give you a 30-second solution. The key to social and healthcare is to recognise, number one, they're the same problem. They relate very closely to each other. If you don't have proper social care, you end up with people in the NHS that should never be there in the first place. And actually, it makes this conversation circular, because it brings us back to the need to prevent people going into the health service, into hospitals and GP surgeries, when they don't need to be there and wouldn't need to be there if there was proper social care provided. So instead of thinking of GP services, hospital services and social care as separate silos, we have to think of them as a single joined-up service. And I hope that's what will come out of this, in my view, massively unnecessarily prolonged process.
And what is their reasoning behind the 3-year delay?
That it comes up just before the next election and nobody can hold them to account for doing anything.
Wow. OK, well, I think that's going to become a rather familiar theme, I suspect, with immigration, crime, the economy. You think Labour in 28, 29 are going to be begging us for more time because one parliamentary period is not long enough to solve all of the problems that the Conservatives left us previously? Do you think that's basically going to be the message?
I don't remember a government at the end of its first term that didn't make that case for a second term, actually, whether it was a Tory government or a Labour government. I think that's a comment on the human nature. Yes, well, the difference will be whether we actually believe this lot or not. I suspect not. Stephen Dorrell, former Conservative Health Secretary, thank you very much indeed. Do let me know what you think. Do you agree with Stephen? I mean, effectively, I think what he was saying was, and I don't want to be unfair to him, but the NHS is on a pedestal and maybe we shouldn't criticise it. Well, sorry. In deference to that, I will continue to criticise it, because I think the NHS suffers with such problems that are not just of a financial and resource nature. It is very much a problem beset by way of human beings, the problems of organisation and efficiency. Let me know if you agree with me, or you agree with Stephen Dorrell that perhaps we should just leave alone because most of the NHS is just fine. Well, frankly, I don't think it is. 0344 499 1000, or text your message after the word talk to 87222. When we come back, we're going to be talking about darts. Apparently that's a sport, I'm led to believe. I'm Russell Quirk, back after this.
God, it's disgusting. I mean, especially, look, I've been in Parliament. I was in Parliament for her for 9 years, and all she'd talk about would be helping abused domestic women when she worked for that charity. And it's just hypocrisy. Is it because it's not the right type of people she wants to prosecute? I'm sorry, but it's wrong.
Dame Andrews, sorry, do you mean the wrong colour?
Yeah, absolutely. The wrong race, definitely. And that's wrong.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. Before we go to Nick Ellaby, who's in the studio to talk about the darts, let me just bring you this. Elon Musk has woken up wherever he is in the United States and has just tweeted the following, that in his opinion, Jess Phillips is a rape genocide apologist. I'll repeat that. Elon Musk has just tweeted that Jess Phillips, who is MP for Yardley in Birmingham and, of course, the Equalities Minister, he says Jess Phillips is a rape genocide apologist. Wow, freedom of speech and all that. He has the right to an opinion. What do you think of that? 0344 499 1000. He's certainly out of his box, isn't he, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, that's a mad tweet. There's no doubt about it.
He's got a point, though, isn't he?
No, she's not a rape genocide apologist. She doesn't support rape and genocide in that sort of way, in this way.
Well, she's hardly done much to try and uncover the problems associated with...
I would obviously say where I was going to go with that is that she has failed in her duty as a government minister in this area, looking after women. She's totally failed in this role. That's what she should be called out for. And why she's doing that should also be called out, i.e. for her own electoral purposes.
I think I refer back to what we said earlier on, actually, that you do need strong voices to highlight problems, and particularly when it seems that our politicians are wanting. In this case, of course, Jess Phillips is part of the decision not to hold a government inquiry on the gang rapes that have gone back over many, many decades in the likes of Rotherham, Rochdale, Oldham, Telford and more. I suspect, look, this is going to run and run and run. It might be unsavoury, but I think the principle of someone like Elon Musk calling Jess Phillips out in principle, I think is the right thing to do, because it shines a light on it and it will continue to be in public debate as per us talking about this now. Should we change gears slightly, or rather significantly, and talk about last night's darts with Nick Ellaby from TalkSport?
Morning, Russ. Yeah, good. Well, talking about gears, actually, Luke Littler, as a darts player, is something they say about Luke Littler, is he has all these different gears that he can go to if he needs. So
talk to me like I'm completely ignorant of darts as a sport, which apparently it is.
Yeah.
And
we were having this debate on TalkSport today, whether it's a sport or not. People are divided, you know, but there is a physical exertion there. And there is a mental aspect. There is really, and you see that with these players, that when they have to finish each leg on a double, and that, you know, we're talking about millimetres, huge pressure.
They're always in front of a live crowd.
Oh, I mean, yes, for the professional events, and even I've been to league matches where, you know, you get the other players and people milling around. So it's always a pub-ish or social club atmosphere and noise around. But the PDC World Championship started in the 90s. We had the BDO before that, and you may remember Eric Bristow.
Yes.
You know, the big champion of that era. But in the 90s, PDC started, and then Barry Hearn got involved as a promoter and said, look, we need alcohol in there. We need this atmosphere, because it was a lot quieter.
We need alcohol?
Yeah.
As in fueling the players. It reminds me of that Not the 9 o'clock news sketch, which you are probably too young to remember.
No, I do. I remember it.
Always doubles and treble. Mel Smith and Griff Rhys-Jones.
I used to
double
watch
whiskey
as a kid.
Trebles. Yeah, treble.
He's gone for the double.
Yeah,
exactly.
So talk to us about what's happened.
The players aren't allowed to drink on stage anymore. But as we understand it, there is quite a lot of drinking going on backstage. They don't like to talk about that.
So you think the drink helps play?
A lot of players, the older players certainly, will not like to play without a few drinks because they think it, then they feel like it relaxes them and then it inhibits their performance.
So it's part of the darts culture.
Luke Littler, yes, it is, absolutely.
Yeah, but Luke Littler is 17.
He can't drink. And he actually doesn't drink. He plays sober. He's one of the very few players that plays sober.
So just outline what happened last night. So Luke Littler won by a comfortable margin, as I understand it, in the semi-finals.
Yes, Luke Littler is from Warrington, and his semi-final opponent was Stephen Bunting, who's from St Helens. So they're right next to each other. They know each other really well. They go back a long way. And it was a very good-natured semi-final. A lot of fist-bumping in between sets, which some fans don't like because actually it shows where's the edge.
They like the rivalry.
Yeah, but they go back such a long way. So there's a bit of criticism about that. But Luke Littler won 6-1. Tonight is the best of 13 sets, so it's the first of 7. It gets slightly longer as we go through the competition. And his opponent will be Michael van Gerwen, who will be his toughest opponent so far in this tournament. He's a 3-time champion. He's 35 years old. He's the previous youngest winner at the age of 24. That was 10 years ago. He's not quite the player he was at his peak, Van Gerwen, but he's been playing really, really well.
And what's your prediction?
I think Luke Littler's going to win. Wow. And like we talked about gears at the beginning, every time in this tournament he's been, maybe his opponent's trying to get into the game, he has got another gear to go to, and he hasn't got that elusive 9-dart finish. So, you come from 501 and you've got to get to 0 and you have to finish on a double. There is a 9-dart finish, which is one of the most difficult things to do in sport, which basically means 2 maximums, so 2 180s, all 3 of your darts into the treble 20. And then another, there's a different option for the third, but basically finishing on 9 darts is the fewest darts you can check out from 501 in. He's done it, but not in the PDC World Final. He's been targeting it. He's been close a couple of times. We've seen 2 in this tournament. If we can get one tonight, the crowd in the Ali Pali will go insane, and that's what people love about it. Last night we had Stephen Bunting coming out, kissing his son. They look like us. Mm-hmm. Like we could pick up some darts, and if we played for long enough, we're not looking at Cristiano Ronaldo, some sort of god that was unattainable figure. These are guys that look like us and talk like us.
And it does beg the question. So, Luke Littler is 17 years old.
Yeah.
What sort of childhood has he had that he is effectively an expert at something that is a pub game? I mean, does that show a misspent youth, do you think?
I mean, not necessarily, no. There's lots of videos of him playing as in nappies with a Velcro darts and board at home.
Wow.
And he's just been doing that his whole life.
So he's the David Beckham of darts, effectively?
I would say the Pele of darts.
The Pele of
actually.
darts.
And last year, when he first played in the PDC Worlds, when he got to the final, age 16, I actually went up to Warrington St Helens to find out about what this hotbed of darts, and went to his darts academy, met his coach, and we went to a night, and there's full of these young kids, right? They've all got their own shirts, their own dart nicknames, yeah, some of them with incredible mullets, and they're playing on a full-size dartboard, and a lot of them are so small they can't get their own darts out of the board. They have to put a chair underneath the board and get on the chair to get their darts out.
And this has a massive audience. You credit kind of Barry Hearn with that, who's the ultimate promoter. What sort of audience will this have tonight, the final?
We're talking about millions on TV. The capacity for Ali Pali, the Alexandra Palace in London, is only 10,000. There was some fears that they would take this championship to Saudi Arabia, but it's dry. There'd be no. And Barry Hearn said there's no way that's happening.
Well, because that doesn't go with the drink that seems
exactly.
rather necessary.
It would be dry, and it would be a TV event rather than a live event, and that's the beauty of it. I urge everyone to tune in to watch it or to listen to it on talkSport.
And Alan, are you enthused by this? Is this your thing?
It's a great. I remember watching darts as a kid in the 80s when it was Eric Bristow and Jockey Wilson and that gang, and it was, you could be entranced by it, watching it for hours. I played darts, not professionally obviously, but pub here and there. It's a fun pastime, and actually the point is, it's something within everyone's reach. I think that's part of it as well. You've said quite rightly, this is something anyone can do, and it's true. All of us at some point, surely even you, Russell, have picked up a dart and given it a go. No,
well, guys, we've got a dartboard over at talkSport. I invite you both to have a few chucks if you want later.
Sounds like a gauntlet being thrown down. And big money now in this sport. So although it starts, as I guess football did originally, as a kind of very much a working class endeavour.
Absolutely.
I suspect, particularly now that we've got the Hearn family involved, that there's big money involved in terms of prize money. What sort of money's up for grabs tonight?
It's still a very working class sport in terms of the culture. The prize money for winning tonight, the PDC World Championship, is $500,000.
Wow.
So, you know, the top 10, 20 players in the world, you would say they're rich. They make a lot of money.
They make 6-7 figures a year.
Absolutely.
Well,
yeah.
Luke Little won £1 million of prize money last year as a 16-year-old.
So yeah. Luke Humphreys, I think, who won the PDC last year, beating Littler in the final. I think he's made $2 million in the last year. So for that top echelon of players, yeah, there's a lot of money involved.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's incredible to me because it's not something that I've really followed, I have to say.
Well,
but,
tell you
fair
what,
play.
next year, we'll get you in a chicken costume to down a 4-pint pitcher of beer. We'll get some tickets from TalkSport and we'll
to
take
go and
you.
watch.
Lord Ed Vasey from Times Radio wants to come as well.
Is that mandatory, the chicken outfit and being completely inebriated? That's mandatory.
It's not,
does that help soften the blow of the boredom of that?
I don't think it's not mandatory, but it's that time of year, isn't it? It's like it's dark.
Nick, sorry, what's with the chicken outfit? What's the significance?
It stuck in my mind because last night Stephen Bunting, when he came out for the semi-final, you know, like I said, he kissed his son, said hello to his family on the way out with his entrance music, and then took a selfie with a guy in a chicken costume.
But why?
You don't get that in other sports.
No, you don't, and maybe understandably. Why fancy dress? Why chicken outfits? What's the significance?
I guess it's fun. Like maybe it goes back to that sort of like some sort of something deep in ourselves, that winter festival that, you know, we're all stuck inside at the moment. The nights are long.
Well, because the NHS have told us apparently that we're not allowed to go out.
We need to enjoy ourselves. The Ali Pali is the happiest place in the world, and it certainly will be tonight.
And the fleeting glimpses I have had of this when it's been on the telly and I've immediately kind of twitched over has been that it is a very, very exciting and highly charged atmosphere. I mean, and presumably no trouble. I mean, it's not like a football thing where you've got rivals against each other kind of causing trouble.
I've had hooligans in a darts crowd coming out.
I've not seen
it. It can be quite dangerous, couldn't it?
They did kick a bloke out for, like I said, for downing a 4-pint pitcher of beer. He did get thrown out for that.
Why?
I think...
Sounds like it's de rigueur.
Yeah,
it's
I know.
standard.
I was strange. That was during the quarter-final between Luke Littler and Nathan Aspinall. Nathan Aspinall was throwing, and then he actually stopped throwing to turn around and watch this guy finish the 4-pint pitcher.
Wow.
He was just loving it so much.
It's almost a sidebar as another element to the sporting...
Absolutely, and these guys have to focus while all this is going on in the background.
I'm just going to say one thing, though. They said no to the Saudis this year. If the money's good enough, they'll be in Saudi Arabia.
Well, it will always follow the money, presumably, won't it? And
for one little, they'll do one thing there and get paid a lot of money.
And there'll be some dispensation over alcohol, a bit like there is in Dubai for various endeavours.
I think drinking at sporting events in Saudi is very difficult to see that happening any time in the near future. They are talking about expanding Ali Pali, maybe giving a couple more thousand seats, but it could move away from there to a bigger theatre. I would say unlikely to go to Saudi at this stage.
And for those that are so inclined, what time is it on tonight?
8 o'clock, so coverage starts at 7 o'clock on TalkSport. It's live on TalkSport. So
it's live on TalkSport, so it's commentary all the way through?
Commentary all the way through, and it's obviously on Sky Sports as well. But the best thing to do is listen on TalkSport and watch the TV on mute.
Yeah. Well, of course, TalkSport, where the best commentary is, for sure. So, well, look, thank you very much indeed, Nick,
Pleasure.
for enlightening us. I am enlightened. I am now slightly intrigued. I'm going to watch it for a little bit tonight, just to see if I get the darts bug.
Darts fever.
Yeah.
We've all caught it.
Let's see, shall we? OK, look, we're going to take a break up to the news. Thanks to Nick Ellaby, and I'll be back after this. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. A shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in on Farmer, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk here for the next hour until 1. Then I'll be handing over to Ian Collins. Let's go over to the US. We haven't talked about this today yet, but of course the huge story, or should I say stories, with regard to 2 attacks over the last 48 hours in the United States. The New Orleans attack, which of course was an individual running over and killing 15 people on one of the busiest streets in New Orleans. So I want to talk to Sebastian Gorka about that, and also obviously the other attack in Las Vegas, which was the Tesla Cybertruck that by no coincidence was it a Tesla Cybertruck, ignited, blown up outside a Trump hotel. Let's talk to Sebastian Gorka, who's Senior Director for Counter-Terrorism in the second Trump administration. Congratulations on that, Sebastian. Thanks for joining me. What's going on over there? Any updates?
Well, what we know right now is that the FBI, in true incompetent Biden-Harris administration fashion, is backtracking. First, they said it wasn't a terrorist attack. Then they said it is a terrorist attack. First, they said they were looking for accomplices. The man Jabbar did not act alone. Yesterday, they said it looks like there were no accomplices. So right now, we're just waiting for the 17 days to expire so President Trump, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and myself can come in and actually get to the bottom of what really happened and share those details in an unclassified fashion with the world.
And what is the narrative from the incoming administration with regard to these 2 incidents?
Well, the narrative is pathetic. We had Biden make a statement yesterday congratulating the Department of Justice and the FBI for their investigations of these attacks, and not talking about the fact that their job is to prevent such attacks. Yeah. Instead of the FBI doing that, they've been surveilling Catholics in Richmond, Virginia for going to Latin Mass. They've been raiding President Trump's home at gunpoint. So it's time to depoliticize federal law enforcement and intelligence agency and get back to what it should be doing, which is protecting Americans.
Well, which is the government's priority as a role, right? I mean, that is exactly what government is there to do, not to get in the way of us, but to protect us. But what's the Trump narrative? What is your narrative as the incoming administration?
Well, the president posted on social media, and then his incoming deputy chief of staff backed it up, Stephen Miller, who was the genius behind our original immigration policies under the first Trump administration. President Trump said this is connected to our open borders, despite the fact that the individual may have been born and raised here in the U.S., is utterly irrelevant. As Stephen Miller stated after the president's post, there's no such thing as indigenous jihadism to the United States. That's not an American thing. It is a function of actors from the outside who have penetrated and infected our society, whether or not it's illegals coming in to execute attacks as one individual was planning for election day before he was intercepted, or whether it's this former army veteran who was either recruited or connected online with some kind of jihadi larger organization. We have to secure the borders, and we have to take this threat seriously instead of going after conservatives.
But of course, Donald Trump in the past has talked about the fact that it is an open-door migration policy, foreign aliens coming to the United States with malintent. But of course, both of these individuals, so Shamsuddin Bahar Jabbar, born in Texas, so a US citizen, albeit of Arab heritage, but Matthew Livelsberger, who's was an active US Army soldier, the individual who seemingly detonated explosives in the Cybertruck outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. I mean, there's no ISIS connection there whatsoever. I mean, very much a homegrown individual. So does this is this a problem, do you think, for the Trump immigration or the anti-immigration narrative when it seems that more and more of these attacks are homegrown?
Hardly. I mean, these are just two instances, sadly, in the complete catastrophe that is the last 4 years of the feckless Biden-Harris regime. I mean, 8 Russian nationals from the Tajik region were recently apprehended planning terrorist attacks here in the United States. Likewise, a Pakistani individual came in through the border and was hired by Iran to assassinate President Trump. These are all open source, unclassified stories. Maybe they don't get across the pond to the UK, but the fact is we have at least, that we know of, 8 million illegals who have been let into this country by Kamala Harris, the erstwhile border czar, and by Joe Biden. If only 1% of the 8 million are malefactors, terrorist cartel members, we are talking about divisional size assets that the Democrats have let into this country. So whether the person is born here or not, the open border is a suppurating chest wound that is a threat to this nation, which will be secured at 12:01 when President Trump raises his hand for a second time and takes the oath of office as commander-in-chief.
So are the dots that the Republicans are seeking to join here, that even though some of these attacks will be homegrown, it's because of failures of in particular, the Biden administration letting in illegal immigrants, that those illegal immigrants are the ones that are somehow influencing those homegrown terrorists? Is that what you're saying?
Possibly, but it's a far, far broader issue. So you have to look at the philosophy of the last 4 years. The fact is we have a regime that simply acts in anti-American ways. So ask yourself one very simple question. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a very simple question. If your goal were to actually undermine the United States, what would you have done differently in the last 4 years than the actions that have been taken by the Biden-Harris regime? From literally dismantling the border to releasing billions of dollars to our #1 enemy in the Middle East, which is Iran. The list goes on and on and on to, the transgender lunacy that they have inserted into our armed forces, using drag queens in the US Navy as recruitment ambassadors, making us look like a laughingstock across the world. So the question isn't just, illegals coming into America recruiting or inspiring jihadis. It's this whole un-American attitude to your job as the commander-in-chief and saying, oh, Iran, you want billions of dollars? Here you go. Or telling Israel that, they shouldn't take the fight against global jihadism to the doorstep of those responsible for the massacre of the Jews on October the 7th. On and on, the list is far, far deeper than incidents, individual incidents. It's more of a philosophy of anti-Americanism.
But you think, you think a sinister thing in terms of the Biden administration almost being hell-bent on destroying America, rather than perhaps what this really is just misplaced ideology on the part of the Democrats, because a bit like we currently have here in the UK, Sebastian, open doors, all refugees welcome, regardless of the unintended consequence of those failures to integrate from a cultural perspective. So it might not be the former, very possibly the latter, I would suggest.
Well, it doesn't really matter. I don't care what the source is. The question is, what are the actions being taken? If you're, look, I was born in the UK, as you well know. If you don't like the UK, if you think Britain is a dirty word, if you think Churchill was a problem, you're going to take actions that are antithetical to the founding principles of the UK. The same is true here in the United States. If you have somebody who, like Obama, remember Obama was Biden's former boss, who days before he's sworn in as president says what? We are days away from fundamentally transforming the United States. Why would you want to fundamentally transform that which you love? Try it with your wife. I don't know if you're married, but go home tonight and say, hey, darling, I love you, but I want to fundamentally change you. I think you'd spend the night on the couch at the very, very best.
I think I'd probably spend the rest of my life on the couch, Sebastian. I would suggest.
Right. So whether it's ideological, whether it's subconscious, it doesn't matter. Opening the borders, giving billions to our enemies, saying that, you know, you're a nation based on racism or what have you, as the 1619 Project did here, it leads to these kinds of things because you weaken the very fiber of the republic that is the United States.
Let's roll forward 17 days then, Sebastian. What are the first things that Donald Trump is going to do after his inauguration?
Well, as the amazing incoming real borders are, unlike Kamala, Tom Homan has stated, we will secure the border instantaneously. As soon as the president is sworn in, we put in place all of the border regime we had in the first Trump administration, and under Tom Homan's guidance, under the new incoming Secretary of Homeland Security, Governor Noem, under Stephen Miller, Kash Patel of the FBI, we will begin the largest deportation operation in U.S. history.
And how is that going to happen in practical terms? I mean, how are these people found? How are they going to be deported? Will they have legal redress? Will that process get caught up as it would do here? Obviously, we have the injustice, the inconvenience, the obstacle of being tied to the European Convention of Human Rights by what we call the Human Rights Act, which Tony Blair brought in 1998. Does the US have such obstacles? I mean, presumably you have a Supreme Court that is going to have something to say if there are thousands and thousands of appeals against deportation.
Right, so it is a prioritized system. I'll leave it to Tom to describe the details for you, and I'm happy to connect you and get him on the show. But the fact is we have to start with the greatest threat. We know, this is from Biden information, more than 30,000 hardened criminals have been let into this country by the Biden regime. So we start with those people who we know already that are rapists, murderers, members of cartels. In collaboration with the local authorities, the state authorities, they will be located and they will be removed by the ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents, by Customs and Border Protection, by DHS, and then we'll go down the list until we have a situation where people come to this country who come here legally, like I did. I will be the Senior Director for Counterterrorism as a legal immigrant to the United States, who waited, got in line, paid my money,
jumped through the hoops,
jumped through the hoops, took a civics test, and then took an oath to the U.S. Constitution as a newly minted naturalized citizen. That's the way it should be in every country. A country cannot survive. You know this with what's happening with regards to immigration. A country cannot survive unless it controls those who come in to live in that nation.
Well, I was going to say, I wonder whether the Labour administration here will take note from what's about to happen over the next few months in the United States. I mean, I suspect that Trump being Trump, and with the cabinet and the advisors that he has assembled, particularly with Elon Musk, who is nothing less than very, very vocal indeed. Obviously, we just read out a particular tweet from him about our Jess Phillips, accusing her of being a rape and genocide apologist. So I suspect with Elon Musk particularly by his side, obviously the owner of X as a network, there are going to be lots and lots and lots of announcements and seeming successes that will be trumpeted publicly from the American administration that we won't be able to help but take notice of here in Britain. The problem is, I suspect our Labour government won't take notice.
Well, I'm not going to speak for 10 Downing Street, but you're absolutely right. I mean, like myself, Elon Musk is a legal immigrant to the United States, the most successful man in the world outside of President Trump. President Trump's wife, likewise, is a legal immigrant. And let's just say with regards to the UK and the US, I think you know as well as anyone, President Trump has a very, very special place in his heart for the UK, for familial reasons, for history and so forth. So maybe some of it will rub off and the special relationship can be special once more.
And talk about relationships, let's talk about Nick Clegg, can we? Our former Deputy Prime Minister in the coalition that was formed between the Conservative Party here and the Liberal Democrats in 2010, famously went off to work for Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, but all changed there by the looks of it. Looks like he's out on his ear. He has been, I would suggest, a sacrificial lamb as far as Mark Zuckerberg kicking him out on the street. Why do we think that might have happened?
I can't speak for Mark Zuckerberg. I can only report to you what has been noted in the mainstream media, that in the last 7 weeks, everyone who is of consequence in Silicon Valley and Palo Alto have visited Mar-a-Lago, from the CEO of Amazon to Netflix to Bezos to Zuckerberg himself. Zuckerberg has donated handsomely to the inauguration fund. He also said, quite rightly, that after President Trump was shot in the head by a Democrat donor at the rally in Butler, the way he responded, got up with his bloodied face, pumped his fist in the air and said, fight, fight, fight. I think, if I remember correctly, Zuckerberg said, quote, that is the most badass thing I've ever seen, as Elon Musk has as well. So maybe even the wokerati and the Silicon Valley types have come around to the understanding that loving the nation that you are a citizen of is a good thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a coming around of ideology or philosophy. I would suggest that Mark Zuckerberg is extremely worried commercially with regard to what Donald Trump might do that would affect the success of the likes of Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and so on. Zuckerberg, of course, has not been particularly complimentary about Trump. Trump, obviously, it won't have gone unnoticed, would have realised that there were certain alleged activities by Facebook that sought to prevent Trump being elected back in 2000 and whenever it was, 2016. So I should suspect this is more about commercial imperative on the part of Mark Zuckerberg, which is why I think Nick Clegg is the sacrificial lamb, rather than this being a change of philosophy or ideology, don't you think?
Possibly, but I can't look into a man's soul and make that determination, and really I don't care whether you're doing it for reasons of fear or reasons of love. At the end of the day, you know, Machiavelli wrote about this centuries ago. The most important thing is, do you act differently? And if he's acting differently, and if it's to support an America First agenda, then so be it, and God bless him.
Yeah, but I think it also has to have an element of authenticity to it, Sebastian, doesn't it? Surely we want to see integrity.
It's functional. It's functional,
is it also the fact that, of course, his greatest rival when it comes to social media is Elon Musk, Donald Trump's best mate?
Look, at the end of the day, it's a functional decision. Are they acting differently? Are they not censoring people for political purposes? And you said allegedly, you know, involved in election interference. It's not alleged. He actually confessed on the Joe Rogan show. He said the FBI came to us and told us to suppress the real story of the Hunter Biden laptop 4 weeks before the election, and we complied. That's Mark Zuckerberg in a 3-hour interview with Joe Rogan. So, yeah, whether he's worried for the future of his company or just believes that censorship of the truth is a bad thing, it doesn't matter as long as he does the right thing at the end of the day, and only he knows that internally.
Yeah. All right, Sebastian Gorka, thank you very much indeed. Very insightful as ever. Quickly, just before we go to a break, quick word from you, Alan. Do you agree with me? Am I being cynical with regard to Mark Zuckerberg's sudden change of heart?
No, I think you're absolutely on the money there. The reality is that he can see the way the economic winds are turning, and he doesn't want to be outflanked in his key business, and as a result, of course, he's going to go and kiss the ring. It makes perfect sense, and it does make a mockery, though, what he was saying beforehand. And,
I think it's hilarious. I mean, it's such an obvious
it's happened everywhere, though, hasn't it?
And it's so obviously not because of a change of heart from his heart. It's to protect his share price, I suspect, because he's now rather worried about what Donald Trump might do. Donald Trump, of course, not known for his sympathy. He has a long memory when it comes to grudges.
Well,
he does.
He does, but he does like it when people
suck up.
Suck up and acknowledge their mistakes. He's very happy with that. It's very medieval in his approach. If you pay him fealty, he will reward you.
But I think Zuckerberg shall now be known as Suckerberg then, as a consequence. See what I did there. OK, back after this. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
And you're going back to the old days of the old copper walking round, and they knew everyone, and they knew who was up to things. We still did that roughly in 2020. We knew who our criminals were. We knew on the briefing when somebody. When burgling Bill was coming out of prison that week, that we knew our crimes were going to go up in the burglary. So we would put emphasis on that and get him in prison as quickly as possible again.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk, here till 1 o'clock. Then I'll be handing over to Ian Collins, who will be taking you through till 4 o'clock. We talked earlier about the 20 Labour councillors that have quit as a consequence of their criticisms of Keir Starmer. That happened yesterday. The group of councillors now sit as independents on Broxtowe Borough Council in Nottinghamshire, and quite a development, really. I mean, for 20 to resign, specifically, they say, because of Keir Starmer's approach to the likes of withdrawing the winter fuel allowance from pensioners, and also, of course, his treatment, his about-turn compared to when in opposition on helping to compensate the WASPy women, and also in particular the decision by the Labour government to seemingly allegedly try to improve local democracy by getting rid of it, I would say. This is devolution by the Labour government with regard to how they want to consolidate local councils at district, metropolitan, county level even, to have less of them, of course, which is a dilution of local democracy, in my opinion. Do let me know what you think about this, by the way. 0344 499 1000. We'll be taking some of your calls before the end of the show at 1 o'clock. But someone that knows all about this, because she resigned the Labour whip as MP for Canterbury, is Rosie Duffield. Rosie, thank you very much indeed for joining me this afternoon.
Hi, Russell.
So you were the kind of catalyst, really. I mean, only 2 months into a Keir Starmer premiership, you resigned the whip with, I think what was reported at the time, a rather scathing resignation letter. Do you want to talk us through that quickly as to what you said and why you decided to resign the whip?
Yeah, I think I feel much the same as these Labour councillors, that our so-called left-wing, Labour offering just vanished and disappeared almost overnight. And, the public aren't stupid. They voted not just against a Tory government, but for a Labour government. And we were not offering anything that we'd been promising for the last sort of 10, 14 years in opposition. And I didn't recognise that this was a Labour government anymore. And all of the things that I'd campaigned alongside those colleagues and those leading cabinet ministers for, like the 2-child limit, WASPy women, winter fuel allowance, all of those things, just an end to child poverty, were just vanished overnight. And I couldn't, in good consciousness, say that that was a Labour government.
Yeah, so it was very evident very quickly, wasn't it, after the Labour election victory in July, that not only were many of the things that were in the manifesto, they were not enacted, but lots and lots of things that were not in the manifesto were enacted. So you kind of fell on your sword, I guess it's fair to say. Why do you think you were the only one, Rosie?
I think there are a lot of people who feel the same as me, but it's frightening doing that. And I'd come in, I was in the unique position that I had just earned about £11,000 as a part-time teaching assistant before I got to Parliament. So the absolute worst thing that could happen to me is that I went back to being a part-time teaching assistant or working in a supermarket or something, and I've survived that.
What you mean financially?
People have been,
financially?
Yeah, and I think, if that's the worst that can happen, so be it. I've done that and it's okay. And I think a lot of MPs who are career MPs or have been MPs for a lot longer than me, you know, you do develop a certain lifestyle. You do become dependent on that job. And I think it's a very frightening thing to suddenly think that you're putting your career at risk. And there's been a very bullying culture for the last few years in the Labour Party. Anyone who dissents, anyone who speaks out, you know, there's already a set of very experienced senior backbench Labour MPs who have not been given a job in the front bench or the cabinet, who should have done based on their experience. And they know that it's because they're outspoken, because they're not Starmer loyalists. That's the number one thing he has looked for. And it's a frightening atmosphere. I don't blame anybody for feeling the way I do, and there are many Labour MPs who do, but for being quiet. There's a lot at stake.
Well, I guess what will happen as councillors start to lose their seats and therefore councillors start to defect, as the grassroots kind of, as the ground crumbles under Keir Starmer, which I think with the news yesterday that 20 councillors have resigned the whip, as you did, I think that will start to focus the minds of MPs in the run-up to the next election, which I know seems a long time away, but I suspect there'll be a lot of your former colleagues that a couple of years out will be very, very concerned that they're not going to be re-returned as Labour MPs because of these policies. What will you do, Rosie, though? Will you wait for Keir Starmer to be replaced, which I think is probably inevitable before the next general election, and then find a way back, or are you determined to carry on and then stand again as an independent?
Do you know what? Honestly, I'm not sort of talking political spin here, but I just don't know yet. I mean, it's 4 years away, like you said, that's forever in politics. I would really like to rejoin the Labour Party. I'd like to recognise it as the Labour Party that I joined and have always been supportive of. But
because you think the Labour Party has left you rather than you having left it?
Yeah, that's how it feels. That's how a lot of my colleagues feel. You know, we don't recognise this as the Labour Party. You know, I get a lot of jibes online. Why doesn't she just join Reform? That's not my politics at all. You know, Jeremy Corbyn's about as likely to join Reform as I am. And really, I just want to see a Labour Party that I recognise and whoever takes over as leader, because I think if the local elections go as badly as things are going now, I think we probably will need to look at...
Well, if they're even held, of course, because, of course, Keir Starmer and his latest bout of tyranny is going to try and cancel them. Who would you like to see be leader of the Labour Party that would allow you, in all good conscience, to come back?
That's a really good question, and to be honest, I don't know the answer. I think there are people who understand...
Rosie, come on, get off the fence. Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner...
political instincts. Wes and Angela could do a really good job, I think.
But they're rather opposite ends of the political spectrum, I think.
Well, that's true, but I think they've both got very good political instincts, and they understand that they would have to allow the left and left backbenchers and senior backbenchers to have a say. And if they do that, then there's room for me again. Do you
think anybody's better than Keir Starmer?
Yes, I didn't vote for him. I knew he'd be not particularly brilliant, but he's much worse than I thought.
Yeah, and in particular, I mean, obviously every week we report on this station, you know, the continuing lack of judgment on his part, the fact that he's been called a centrist. I'm not sure he's a centrist at all.
I don't think he's anything, Russell.
I think he's a sixth form ideologue, Rosie. I think he's a sixth form ideologue that has no political judgment, has no regard for the consequences of his actions, and I think he's playing out his sixth form political fantasies regardless of conscience. I actually think he's deeply lacking in empathy and in conscience. I think he might be a sociopath. Do you agree?
I mean, I've heard people say that. My friend Joan Smith, who sort of has been asking for him to support women and women's rights for a long time, wrote an article in the Mail not long ago saying he had no empathy at all. I think she was spot on, like you've just said. I think it's that he has zero political instincts. I don't know what his political drive, what his beliefs are, what his passion in politics is, and I'm not sure he's got it. I think he likes being in charge. He likes his job. Who wouldn't want that job, I suppose?
Well, he likes flying around the world as a statesman, doesn't he? Meeting the great and the good of the planet's leadership. Yes. I mean, he's made that very, very clear.
People have noticed that, though. That's come out in polls. More in Common have done a poll which said the public are saying, where is he? Why is he always abroad? There are things like that, the sort of lack of showing that you're in touch with what people are saying. And, you know, he didn't get an enormous mandate. I know that sounds really silly because we've got such a huge majority, but we only got Labour only got 1.5% more than our catastrophic defeat in 2019 in this election.
Well, only
So
20% of people voted for Labour. Only 20%.
Exactly.
Rosie,
got a deep mandate.
What do you think, probably for all the wrong reasons, he will be most remembered by? So let's start to write his political obituary, shall we? Will it be waspy women? Will it be taking away the winter fuel allowance? Bearing in mind, we're just going into winter. We've been talking on this channel today about winter weather warnings. So by Labour's own numbers, 4,000 pensioners could die this winter as a consequence of having that winter fuel allowance taken away. What do you think he's going to be best known for, but for all the wrong reasons?
Sadly, I think all of the above, but for political insiders and MPs like me, it's the nepotism, it's the cronyism, it's
the Wahid Ali,
the
gifts.
Yeah, the gifts. There's no excuse for it. We earn a lot of money, and as leader of the opposition, he earned a lot more than most of us. He has not given a good explanation as to why he felt he needed free suits and free glasses at all, why he thought that was acceptable, and free tickets. None of the rest of us do that, and if they do, they need to be ashamed of themselves. And doing that whilst cutting the winter fuel allowance. We're not talking for mega rich people. Some people in my constituency are earning about £12,000 and they will no longer receive the winter fuel allowance. It's not okay, and it's not a Labour government that I want to see carry on like this. So I think those are the things that he'll leave behind, and that's really sad.
Well, I have to say, I appreciate and respect your stand and your candour. Well done to you. It's not very often that we see politicians and MPs with a conscience. You certainly have one. Good luck to you, and thanks for appearing on Talk this afternoon. Thank you. We'll speak to you again very, very soon, no doubt. That was Rosie Duffield. Yes, talk about principled. We need a few more Rosie Duffields, I think, don't we? Actually, you know, marching with their conscience. Well done. OK, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking all things Meghan Markle. I'm sorry.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. It's 12:35. I'm here just for another 25 minutes or so, still with Dr. Alan Mendoza, who I'll come to in a second. First, let's just bring you some breaking news. Two bits of breaking news, in fact. Neil Young has said that he will now be playing the Glastonbury Festival. He will now be playing the Glastonbury Festival, blaming an error in the information that I received previously for him initially turning down the offer because it was under corporate control of the BBC. So, yes, I'm sure you're very excited and happy about this. Neil Young will now play Glastonbury. In sadder news, a 7-month-old baby has died in hospital after a crash on the A1 near Grantham yesterday. Officers are investigating whether the incident was linked to icy conditions. That's what Lincolnshire police are saying. So very, very sad and tragic news. A 7-month-old baby has died in hospital after a crash on the A1 near Grantham yesterday. Horrible. I mean, having to deliver breaking news like that is the worst part of this job, I have to tell you that, and I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that. OK, look, let's change the tone. Let's cheer ourselves up with talk of Meghan Markle, Alan. Now, I know you're a big fan. Huge. Well, you will be relieved to hear that in about 12 or 13 days' time, she has a new Netflix reality, and I'm saying it with big inverted commas for those that are listening to this on DAB and on your smart speaker, a reality show which I think is called Love Meghan or some other such tosh. So this is a massive PR exercise on the part of Meghan Markle. Netflix have stooped to the lowest of the low, in my opinion, to actually publish and produce this rubbish. This effectively is Meghan Markle and all her woke buddies, including her makeup artist, who apparently is one of her best friends now. And she can be seen in a kitchen, I'm sure it's probably not her kitchen, with her dog and her mates, baking cakes, making desserts, flower arranging, and more. Have a look at this guff.
I'm going to share some little tips and tricks. I see what color I gravitate to, and everything goes from there. And how you can incorporate these practices every day. That's what you want. You want that shape and texture. Come on. This is about connecting with friends. I love that we're doing this together for the first time. Making new friends. That is so good.
We're family now.
And just learning. Look at how much honey we have.
Do you believe in love?
I mean, that is the biggest load of fakery, the biggest kind of sick-inducing, cringe-worthy load of old rubbish ever, isn't it? I did say to Mike Graham when I came in to do the handover with him that I might actually watch it, Alan, on the basis that I think it will be so bad it might be good. You know, one of those things. It'll be a pastiche of rubbish. It'll be made up. As if Meghan Markle spends all of her time, all of her days, on a daily basis in her, Montecero kitchen, making cakes and desserts and other such delicacies.
With new friends, don't forget. For
her friends. Yeah, new friends. Old friends. Yes. And she calls this a kind of celebration of joy. She says, this isn't about perfection, this is about playfulness. I mean, it's like one of those, the worst kind of cringeable TV adverts you've ever seen. It's obviously designed to re-endear her to the public because she's pretty internationally disliked, I think it's fair to say. Will you be watching?
No, I won't be watching. And Russell, I have to say, I'm shocked that you won't watch the darts, but you want to watch Meghan Markle. I mean, this is a terrible choice.
I need to open my mind a bit more, don't I, on the darts. No, I will try to watch this. I did start to watch the polo episode that Harry and Meghan produced but weren't in. That was another pathetic effort at TV, of course, a few weeks ago. I lasted 5 minutes.
Well, people keep on paying them for this nonsense. So this is the extraordinary part. Someone is going, there's going to be an audience for this. I wonder who the audience is. Is there an audience? I mean, we'll see the ratings and work out what happens.
Well, I think the ratings for the polo show were absolutely abysmal, as you would expect them to be, because it was a bit of a non-entity as a show. But this is designed to be an insight into the mind of Meghan Markle. And this purports to be how she behaves on a daily basis. I mean, no one is going to believe that for a second, are they? No. That she's some new kind of Martha Stewart reincarnation, whereby all of a sudden now she's, an expert on what we used to call home economics, that she's a kind of stay-at-home mum that, spends most of her time with her elbows in flour and icing sugar, and what a sweet and lovely individual she is. I suspect that the people that are filmed in the kitchen with her, she probably hardly even knows.
Well, that's the most amusing part of this. I mean, you can see her hugging this guy who she wouldn't recognise the next day, basically, if he was in the street and said, "Hi, Meghan," he'd be like, "What? Who are you? Go away, security, get, out of the way." So I think it is a cynical attempt here. But then again, is she doing anything different to many of the shows on Netflix? I mean, a lot of this stuff that goes on is all scripted, it's all nonsense, and it seems to attract an audience. So I'm just wondering, though, again, who will actually decide that, oh, Meghan Markle is going to be their guru of the kitchen? It's not as if she's got any particular form in this regard. It's not as if she is going to perhaps enlighten anyone about, cooking or about what they might do on baking.
Well, it's a PR exercise,
yeah,
isn't it? But to me, it seems, okay, we haven't watched the full thing yet. We've only had that clip, which actually I'd love to see again. But it's twee, it's patronising. It's patronising TV at its very, very worst, because everybody watching it will know that it's not real. It is fake. It is made up. It's cringeworthy nonsense. And let's see what the ratings are. I suspect the first one, the ratings will be okay, because people
will
like
be intrigued. Yeah, we'll go. Yeah,
we'll test it. Yes. And then after that, assuming there's more than one episode, quite how you can get more than one episode into, baking pavlova whilst looking out wistfully across the beach towards the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, as it is. Yes, it's mindless.
You may end up becoming a binge watcher. You may go. You watch the first one so much, you'll go 2, 3, 4.
I think I'd rather watch the darts. Let's see. What do you think of this? 0344 499 1000. Are you a Meghan Markle fan all of a sudden? Are you convinced by this load of old nonsense, this cringe fest, that she is in some way endearing and lovely and normal and ordinary, and we should all love her? 0344 499 1000. What do you think of Love Meghan? Or let me know on text 87222. Let's take some calls now. Let's speak to Dave in London, who I suspect isn't calling about Meghan, but about something else. Dave, are you a Meghan fan?
I'm not, Russell, but don't knock the darts, mate. I can't wait for tonight's final. Luke Littler.
You're a fan?
No, I'm a fan of the darts, yeah.
All right, good. OK, well, you and millions of people will be watching, according to Nick Ellaby. I'm going to tune in. I'm going to try and become a convert. Let's talk about what you wanted to talk about. So you rang earlier to talk about stolen vehicles.
Yeah, I had my Land Rover nicked 18 months ago. I then found out on the grapevine that 10 had gone that weekend in West London alone. The police obviously didn't do anything. But what I wanted to let you know was, I think your last contributor mentioned it. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. Carry on, Dave.
I found out 3 days after that they tend to drive the car 2 or 3 streets away, and they leave it there to make sure the tracker's not in play.
Yeah.
But I didn't find that out until 3 days, which was a bit late. So if any of your listeners get a car stolen, go around the local streets immediately. Don't wait for the police, because you might find it's parked 2 or 3 streets away.
Do you think that with that pearl of knowledge, which makes perfect sense, bit of common sense really, do you think our police force might do a similar thing? So when they get a report of a car stolen, they might do the same thing, actually drive round the area and see if they can spot the car within 2 or 3 streets? Do you think they have the same wisdom as you?
No, when I spoke to them about it, I told them I had CCTV footage. They said, but they're probably wearing a mask. I said, well, they weren't. They're in full facial view. I wasn't being honest about that, but I was intrigued to hear what they would say then. And they just said, well, we don't know. We can't go around blaming people or something like that.
So they effectively put up an obstacle immediately, Dave, as to the reasons why they shouldn't bother investigating it.
Yeah, and I said, well, look, this car would have gone straight down the Great West Road on the A4. You must have 1 million cameras. You must know where it's gone.
Yeah.
But also, on a wider point, I know of 5 kids, well, I say kids, young people in their 20s and 30s that have all applied to join the Metropolitan Police in the last couple of years. Not one of them has been accepted. They've all got degrees. One of them was the son of a friend of mine who died, who was a Metropolitan Police detective. He didn't get it either, and if you'd have told me throughout his life what that guy was going to be, it would have been a policeman. So why is it they're not recruiting people of a certain type into the police force? Because they were all of a certain type.
Well, and without mentioning any names, of course, Dave, what were the reasons that were given? Do they get a reason for their rejection?
No, they don't get a reason. They just get told, thanks, jog on. And clearly those people have started to think there's a pattern to this. But 5 people, I haven't met anyone yet that said, no, I got in okay.
Yeah.
This is about 5 people in the last 2 years that I've...
Well, it would be useful to know what the criteria is. I mean, you would imagine that it would be published somewhere to save people that don't fit the criteria applying.
Can you put in a request for information to ask for who applied, how many got in, and what were the races and nationalities of the people that did and didn't get in?
Yeah. Well, you think there's a diversity thing at play here, Dave?
Well, I can tell you now, all 5 of them, some were boys or men, some were women, but they all had a similar characteristic, and none of them got in.
When you say similar characteristics, you mean that they were all white British people?
Yes, they were.
Yeah, OK. All right, well, look, just say it as it is. I mean, look, it's anecdotal. Obviously, it doesn't prove anything. But, look, good shout. I think, yeah, maybe we will put a request in. Dave from London, thank you very much indeed. Sorry to hear about you, Carl, but your story is reflected, I'm afraid, widely across the country. I've had certain experience of car theft. I know Alan has here as well. And surprise, surprise, without any satisfaction from the police at all. Let us know your experience, 0344 499 1000, or indeed if you want to talk about Meghan Markle. Yeah, I know it sticks in the throat a little bit, but it's normally something that's quite triggering. We have already had a text about it, actually. Good afternoon, Russell. Re Meghan Markle. I do wish that the woman would go and crawl back into the hole that she just came out from, says Julie. I just find that she asked for privacy and then she's on the TV all the time. Yeah, that's what they call hypocrisy, Julie, I think. Back after this, I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
Like fraud or counter-terrorism, but the public never see that. So what really matters to the public are things like shoplifting, so-called signal crimes, things like burglary, robbery, car theft, car windows being smashed in. That's how people perceive whether they are safe or not. And I think if you look at the numbers, in fact, on things like shoplifting, it's slightly different, but overall crime actually has gone down. But what people perceive is that they are more unsafe than ever.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Talk. I'm Russell Quirk, here just for the next few minutes, and I'll be handing over to Ian Collins, who'll be in the studio very shortly. I'm still with Alan Mendoza, who's been with me for the last 3 hours. Thank you very much indeed, by the way. One story we hadn't managed to get to, but I do want to mention it before we close shop at 1 o'clock, is the news that the father of Sarah Sharif, this is Irfan Sharif, who of course was imprisoned for her murder, and without putting too fine a point on it, his outrageous and disgusting treatment of Sarah, the young girl that was tortured and killed. He has suffered an attack in prison, apparently with a makeshift weapon that was made from the remnants of a tuna tin. Now, I'm definitely not going to condone this, absolutely not, although some might have predicted that when you are a monster like Irfan Sharif, you are bound to get some kind of retribution in prison. Again, I'm not condoning it, I'm just telling it how it is. This was bound to happen. Many of you, though, will not be upset by this, I suspect. Again, not condoning it, just telling it how it is. This has happened, and some of you will not be upset by it, I'm sure. Alan, your response?
Well, I don't think anyone's going to be upset by it, as you suggest. But again, look, you know, this is a terrible situation. The crime was horrific for a minimum term of 40 years. That is in itself indicative of how bad the abuse was.
And unusual.
And unusual, yes, and unusual, and just how protracted it was, and how brave the little girl Sarah Sharif was in standing up to him at various times, wouldn't let him get his way, and he still did this with his family members. Absolutely appalling. And I suppose that's the sort of treatment you're going to expect in prison for a crime like this. Of course, as you say, we don't want to see prisoners attacked, lawlessness in prison, but the reality is that prisons are a problem in terms of what goes on there, and, you know, I predict this will not be the only time he'll be attacked.
Prisons have, not that I have experience of them specifically, but they do seem to be an element that will moot out its own type of justice, as I think we're seeing here. Again, not condoning it, but that is what your view may well be. OK, look, let's talk about the weather a bit now before we wrap up. And Brian in Wigan. So, wow, Brian in Wigan. Wigan knows all about weather, doesn't it?
Yes, Russell. We've had our fair share of rain this time. Yeah, the reason why that news, I'm not sorry to hear about what happened in prison from the word go. A couple of things, Russell. Regarding the weather, my wife is Danish, and when it snows over in Denmark, okay, it's worse than over here, but the council employs the farmers.
Does it? To clear the roads?
Yeah, so then it gives them a turnover, and B, it gets done certainly a lot quicker, because I've been over there and thinking when you've landed, it's going to be terribly driving. But no, the roads are clear because the farmers have done it. And like you, I remember the old days, because I'm now 72, just turned. We never got warnings. We used to play in the snow, play snowballs. We used to play on the ice. We have grown up to know what it's like handling snow.
Well, the weather used to be something to celebrate, didn't it, as you say, but now it's something that we're warned about. You know, even if we're only going to get a centimetre of snow, it seems that, you know, the Met Office, the government, and goodness knows who else, now the NHS, start talking about it as if it is something to be feared, something to be avoided. I mean, to the point, as we referenced earlier, Brian, the NHS saying, look, if it's going to snow and be a little bit icy underfoot, which, you know, that does happen in winter, particularly up towards your part of the world, Wigan, because you might slip over, you should stay in. I mean, what a load of old nonsense that is in terms of an edict.
Well, exactly, and you know, when it snowed, you saw the white snowman appearing, as if you can call them white snowmen. Appearing
snow is white, Brian.
Exactly.
Snow is white. You can still say it.
Yeah, and it appearing everywhere, and you know, people loved it, you know, when they could. I mean, they loved it at Christmas when they could get out on the sledges and go down the hills and have fun.
And Brian, why do you think that the likes of Denmark and Finland and Norway and just about everywhere in Northern Europe, why are they so much better at dealing with us? I mean, OK, they have more months of snow, so I guess that they resource things better. But the initiative that you're talking about there, where farmers are employed with snowplows to kind of clear, presumably, all of the roads, I mean, that's not a question of, you know, even money, really, or budget. That's just a question of a very sensible, common sense initiative. I mean, why do you think we fail so miserably when it comes to our airports, our roads and our rail network as soon as the temperature drops below zero?
Because it seems that people think, oh, it doesn't happen in this country.
But of course it does. I mean, it tends to happen just about every year.
Exactly.
I mean, particularly in the north of England.
Exactly.
Scotland,
So
particularly.
you would have thought, hang on, but maybe the people that are running councils now, it does come as a shock. It's all new and whatever. Where people with experience would know how to handle it.
Do you think it's the balance that they find, councils, government, and obviously government funds local authorities to an extent? Do you think it's simply a question of budget being sacrificed, but kind of sacrificed on the altar of the convenience of commuters, motorists and train travellers? I mean, it's almost like we just kind of think it's okay because it's only for a few weeks of the year. But again, with a bit more common sense, a little bit more budget, we would solve the problem of so-called bad weather.
Well, it's best to be prepared than unprepared, and I don't think we're prepared. I don't think people are forward thinking, right, okay, it's going to snow. Oh, let's get the gritters out. No, we'll wait until it's snowed where it's icing, then we'll get the gritters out.
Yeah, but it's not just the roads, Brian, is it? It's the rail networks, it's the airports.
Exactly.
And every year it takes us by surprise, this whole weather thing. And every year we have the same conversation, whether it's the NHS not coping, or gritters not coping, or Gatwick and Stansted and so on not coping. Brian in Wigan, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. Coming up next is Ian Collins until 4 o'clock. Ian, hello.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you? Looking forward to the Meghan Markle thing in a few days' time?
There's a lot of things that have excited me in my life.
And this isn't one of them.
But this is... I'm beside myself. You know, I wanted to try and get tickets. I wanted to be part of the posse that are drinking the Prosecco in the background.
Do you think you can
sent
apply?
Letters to them.
Do you think you can apply to be part of the Cake Fest?
Part of the Cake Fest. I think I could do good in that kitchen.
Yeah.
I think,
do you think it's what Meghan Markle does every day? I mean, that's the impression she's giving, like a kind of reborn Martha Stewart.
She's a reborn Martha Stewart, and hopefully she'll end up in the same place as Martha Stewart.
Which was, for those that don't remember, is prison.
But based on her presenting skills, I think that's might be where she ends up. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, it's reality, but of course we all know it's not reality. I mean,
well, they hired a house, didn't they, for it? It's not even her house.
Yeah, yeah. And did you think they hired the friends?
I think they hired the friends, they hired the Prosecco, and in fact I heard that all the food was made out of Play-Doh.
Play-Doh? I suspect somebody else came in and made it. I mean, it is cringeable. The trailer that they've sent out is absolutely brilliant because, as I was saying earlier, I think it's something I might watch